regular meeting of the Parks and Recreation Commission. We have, I think everybody's here. Roll call?
Petterly,
Here.
Ed Lowing,
Here.
Abby Knopper,
Here.
Pat Markovich, Stacy Ashland, Keith Reckdahl,
Here.
and Greg Schmidt.
Okay, I would like to, we'll start with agenda changes, requests, and deletions, and I'd like to suggest that we move up item number 5, the ad hoc committee report on 7.7 acre property in Foothill Park to be dedicated as parkland. Move that up to number 2, since Darren Anderson is back and forth with the Finance Committee meeting. We'd like to get him while we can so we can make that presentation. Are there any objections to that change? No objections, so we'll move number 5 to number 2. Any other changes? Okay.
Did you want to change the 3 up to take advantage of Darren's presence as well?
Sure.
Okay.
So move 3 to 3 and 2 to 4. Oh, I'm gonna mess this one up.
Just went 2 down, think of it that way.
Okay. Oral communications, members of the public can address the commission on any subject not on the agenda. Please fill out a card and pass it to Sally, and we'll hear your comments. If you have comments on items of business on the agenda, same process, give a card to Sally. All right, let's take up item number 1, approval of draft minutes from the April 22nd, 2014 meeting.
I had
Commissioner
one
Cromie.
change.
Can you turn on that mic?
On page 29, line 1193. Just the second word, it says that's where, where changes to why.
Commissioner Ashland?
Yeah, on page 31, the line is 1267. I'm just going to read the sentence that it should be and highlight the words. We're also in the process of visiting the 3 city community gardens as well as the 3, it says that are neighborhood association, period. It should say that are run by neighborhood associations or run privately. And then it continues, but also available, and we should add to the public. And also on 1272, after Friday's Palo Alto Weekly, comma, insert the word they. So it says, the sentence is they had an article. And in 1273, Barron Park is double R. Also on 1286, Barron Park is double R. Thank you.
Any other corrections or changes? Nope, seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I so move.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the minutes are approved. That takes us to number 2, the new number 2, ad hoc committee report on 7.7 acre property in Foothills Park to be dedicated as parkland. We do have one public comment, so if you have a presentation, then we'll take comment after that.
Sure. Commissioner Knopper, would you like me to kick this one off? Council gave staff, good evening, sorry, Darren Anderson, Division Manager, Open Space, Parks and Golf. Council gave staff 2 directives concerning the 7.7 acre, this undeveloped piece of land sandwiched in between Foothills Park and Mr. John Arriaga's property. The First directive was to get the 7.7 acres dedicated as parkland as soon as possible. And the second was to have staff develop some options for that and bring it to the commission on how we might utilize this piece of land. The first priority really is to get that 7.7 acres dedicated as parkland. And the first step of that is to have it surveyed. So we had our city surveyor come out, mark the area. There wasn't a lot of utilities, which is typically what they use to stake out areas and find exactly where the property lines are at. So it took him a good deal of time, and he still hasn't completed it. So we've contracted that out to a subcontractor, another surveyor, who will have that work completed. This will be a record of survey and map that will be submitted to the county on June 10th. We anticipate that work being completed. So they haven't yet begun. Contract's just being finalized now, and we'll have that person on board soon. And that'll firm up exactly where the boundaries are. I met with Mr. Arriaga, staff person, Michael Wizimati, to talk a little bit about this. He's managed that land for about 25 years now. And when I say managed it, I mean when John Arriaga had the lease, he would be the person grooming it, moving the materials there. And when the lease ended, he would also continue to take care of the drainage ditches in the creek, which has sediment deposits. And if someone doesn't clean that up, eventually the sediment reaches to a point where the water flows over the creek and starts flooding, both on our property in Foothills Park and on the residents down below, which would be Mr. Arriaga's and others. So he's continued to do that, and I talked to him a little bit about those fence lines. We're not totally sure those are exactly on the property line. He said he understood that, and so he's kind of on board and working with us. When the surveyor comes out, probably June 2nd, he'll have access to the side areas just outside the fence lines to help make sure we get everything accurate. So that's the priority, and that's what we're really focusing on right now. However, I did meet with the ad hoc committee working on this, Commissioner Markovich and Commissioner Knopper, to discuss some really just initial kind of high-level ideas for what could possibly go there. Council had asked us to come back with cost estimates. We're really not at that phase at all of development. The amount of effort and time that would go into developing a conceptual plan to get to the cost estimates, you're talking, if we were to pay MIG, we'd be in the neighborhood of $10,000 to $15,000 to have them put together 6 fully developed, cost estimated out with drawings, designs. So you're going to spend a chunk of money. It seemed to me prudent to meet with the ad hoc committee and flesh some of this out before, discuss it with the commission so that we're not investing too much money down squirrel holes that we don't really want to go. As well as, it's a little bit ahead of the cart ahead of the horse before we get to exactly where their boundaries are. So that's kind of where we're at. When we met with the commissioners, staff suggested kind of, again, 4 or 5 general concepts. The first being the least invasive, the least likely to generate high costs, and probably the least invasive in terms of privacy for the surrounding area. Both Actera, who has the nursery site, and they have a lease for another 2 years with an option for 5 more, and the Arriaga property adjacent. This concept could be, what we pitched was kind of a habitat conservation study area where we'd restore it with native trees and shrubs and probably a small grassland, and still maintaining that emergency evacuation route. Likely involved in that would be, and even this being the most basic, you'd still probably have to scrape out the first couple inches of dirt. It's all heavily compacted, it's mixed with base rock. Not good situation for restoration. So we probably have to remove some of that and add some amendments. The actual flat area that we would probably do most of the revegetation is more like 2.3 acres, 2.5 acres. The rest is either sloped or in the creek. So not all the 7.7 would be totally developed under the concept of restoration. Some of it's already forested, has the trees on it that have been planted. A lot of redwoods are up there, et cetera. So that could look a lot of different ways. You could invite in special groups to do study, some sort of environmental study. There's a lot of different ways, and you could minimize the amount of access you wanted in any number of ways. So that's kind of on the low end for all things, cost, number of people accessing the site and everything else. As we started to work our way up, it could be the next one, and I think every single scenario involves restoration in my mind. And I think we agreed on that too. Everyone's been to the site and knows what it looks like. It's kind of an area that's been scraped clean and it's been stored with rock, and it looks like it. So every scenario had some element of restoration in it. And the same would be for the second one that we discussed, restore the area with native vegetation and include a simple loop trail This would be kind of your basic one, not an in and stop, but a loop, and it could still be in there, I believe, while incorporating the emergency evacuation route that would have to be there and is existing, and still work around the creek, probably add a couple of simple benches, something like that, so you'd have access. And there's some pros and cons that I'll get to in a little bit, just to kind of flesh out some of the thinking that went into these ideas. The third idea was you could, and I believe this was Commissioner Knopper, and I'll let her elaborate on this one, but we could restore the area and add some sort of group meeting area, and we could have public art there. It could be some sort of small, sort of natural pavilion style thing where people could gather and meet. Different than what we currently have at the site where we have an interpretive center where people meet, and that's common. We have picnic areas, but this was a little different. We talked about it being without all the amenities, no picnic tables, but would have a nice seated area with shade, things like that. Was another idea, and again, that public art element. And as we escalated up, the ideas to cost and more impact, we got to the ideas of group picnic areas and campgrounds. The challenges that those kind of things would pose are a lack of utilities. So there currently isn't water or sewer or parking in that facility, and all the things that would necessarily come with that. So if you're going to have a group picnic area, we already have a group picnic area nearby with parking that just meets that, just barely. So you would have to add parking if we were going to add an element like that. Where would that go? How would that fit? I don't know. It'd be a challenge, and the same would go with the camping. When you add those other elements, you would need bathrooms, you would need parking, you would need a few other things. So those were some of the ideas we kicked off. There are a few complications that I think we discussed a little bit about. So the Actera site is there. I did have a private discussion with Actera, and they shared with me, this is Alex Hamilton, who's one of the leads at the agency. She might even be here tonight. There she is. Thanks, Alex. And she explained a couple thoughts to me. One is that they're excited about the concept of planting this area. And I won't be too elaborate because I know you've read a number of letters that have been written on behalf of Actera. But as we discussed it, she said, we'd really like to maintain the nursery where it's at if possible, but we're open to moving it if need be, because maybe take advantage of some more sun. That's a rather shaded area. So depending on what design we came up with, Actera would very much like to keep the nursery somewhere in there unless they could find a more advantageous place in there, but definitely not to be removed, was their hope. And from a staff perspective, it's been a very mutually beneficial relationship, one we would certainly like to have continue. It's beneficial to the city and beneficial to our habitat to have that one continue. The creek is another challenge. So Buckeye Creek comes down right through that parcel, as we've all seen. Some of the things about the creek is upstream, we've got an erosion problem. So a lot of sediment's coming down off that creek right into this area, and it needs to be cleaned out, needs to be serviced about annually. The gentleman mentioned earlier, Michael Wiziati, who works for Mr. Yaga, says about each year he brings his backhoe out there and cleans out the sediment. So somehow we'd have to, unless we're addressing that upstream problem, which is not likely to happen in the short term, we're going to have to continue to allow access for some heavy equipment to get down to these areas and service them. So another kind of complication and something to take into account as we look at all these different scenarios. There are also, with the creek traveling through, there's a certain sensitivity to riparian habitat where, and there are some exceptions, but typically you have a setback of a certain number of feet. And we looked through some of the documents that pertain to that, and I can share it in more detail later when we do a formal proposal. But there are different setback requirements off that creek that limit what you can put next to it. Parking, for example, is one that you typically would not be allowed within a certain number of feet, typically 100 of a creek. But we can, again, get more details into that one later. I did mention the emergency access route. Another challenge that we thought of is you're traveling right through the Foothills Maintenance Shop area, which is traditionally not an area where we've allowed anyone to pass through. We would have to make some security changes on how we have it, because we have staff vehicles stored there, we have equipment, we have a maintenance shop with the tools, and so they'd be passing through there. Not insurmountable, but certainly a challenge, and maybe less than ideal. Actera also would face security issues right now because there's a gate there that doesn't allow people, their facilities unsecured. That keeps the deer out And so if we had now had access with a number of these different options that we talked about, they would have to make some significant changes, probably fencing the entire perimeter of their acre and a half or so that they lease through the city to keep both deer and people out. Because they do, I think they maintain, and maybe Alex can correct me, but something like $100,000 worth of value in plants at the peak of planting season during some years. So significant amount of value in materials stored on site. And again, when I met with Michael Wiziati, he said the chief thing he'd hoped I would convey to the commission that they would know is that they are willing to kind of help be good neighbors and help with the fence installation and to continue to service those creeks, the creek and the drainage ditches, which is very generous and helpful. But their big concern was security and privacy, that they would like, as much as possible, that be taken into account if possible. And again, we have not conducted any cost analysis for the possibilities and suggestions that we put forth so far. And that concludes my presentation. Commissioner, anything you want to add?
Thank you, Darren. You said everything very eloquently. I think because there are so many things that have to come first with regard to the actual surveying and figuring that out, and then just really understanding the specifics of the restrictions with regard to the creek and what we can and cannot put close to it. That's really going to limit what can be done there with regard to any kind of real infrastructure like sewage or for camping, et cetera, bathrooms, parking, et cetera. So I guess I'd open it up to any questions at this point.
We have a member of the public to speak, and then we'll have questions and comments. Alexander Von Felt.
Would you like me to use the microphone?
Yes, please, because it goes to the recorder. Thanks.
Right. Well, thank you, commissioners. As Darren sort of previously introduced me, I'm Alexandra Von Felt, and I'm with Actera Stewardship Program. And Actera has a long history with the city of Palo Alto, as some of you may know. We've been working in Arrastradero Preserve and along San Francisco Creek for over 15 years now. And what we do is help improve the ecology of these parks and open spaces using community volunteers to do the work. Last year, we were also awarded the contract for Foothills Park, so we've started working there as well. And it's been a great partnership, and I mean that in the true sense of the word, because as we do get money from the city to help do some of the stewardship, we also go out and seek other sources of funds that benefit the city of Palo Alto. For example, this past year, we were successful in raising $200,000 for our work in Arrastradero, in Foothills Park, and along San Francisco Creek. So all that directly benefits the city. To do all this, we need to grow plants that are native to these different watersheds. And so our native plant nursery is the place where we grow all these plants. And not only do we supply the plants for our own projects, but we also do it for other regional partners, so like Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District, they're in the Pajaro River Restoration Project, Post sometimes buys plants from us as well. So we're a really important regional resource. So I wanted just to introduce myself to you all here today. I'm more than happy to answer some questions. Darren also kind of gave you some background on what he and I had discussed. We're really happy about the change in designation in the park because it seemed to really secure the future of it for that 7.7 acres. We hope, as he said, that we can continue our nursery operations, and we think that it could really integrate very well. We already have volunteers that come and work at our nursery on a regular basis, but we could expand that and have kind of an open house maybe once a month where people from the public could come in and visit the nursery, either to learn about native plants or just about restoration ecology in general. In addition to, of course, we have regular weekend work days at Foothills Park. I support, Darren's idea for the lighter approach. Just given the site, I think most of you have seen it. It's going to take a while just to try to rehabilitate it and get it back up to something that, where we can actually grow a plant in it. But there are also some really nice ideas for the future. And one of our other sites in Redwood Grove in Los Altos, we actually did, I heard about public art, we did a natural willow sculpture that also doubled as erosion control for a creek bank. And we did it with a local artist and involved the community, in creating this natural structure. So there are things like that that we could pursue in the future. So thank you again.
All right, I'll open to questions and comments from commissioners.
You mentioned having the possibility of having a trail go through there. Is there any way to interleave that or have that connect with existing trails? Or would that just be a loop by itself?
It would be a standalone loop.
And there's no way to connect through, like, behind the shed and connect up to Los Trancos or the other trails up in that side of the creek?
Not without significant impacts. You would, I mean, in many ways, and it's fair to say, the main road that comes through the picnic area and through the shop area is walked commonly. So that is in a way a trail, not in the conventional sense that we think of in the open space trails, but it's used commonly. So you would still have connectivity with all the trailheads that come through off that main road.
Mm-hmm. I mean, one thing, when you come down Los Trancos there, and if you want to cross over and go behind the interpretive center, you still have to walk across the grass, and it would be nice if you could just stay on a trail and loop around, and
Yeah.
that would make for a nicer experience, but I don't know if there's even room there, even if we wanted to connect it up, whether we could.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think it'd be too many private parcels you'd be slicing into to get through to that. But I can take a closer look.
Did the shed go right up against the creek, or is there some space between the sheds?
The maintenance shop?
Yeah, the maintenance
Yes.
shed goes
Yes,
right
it's
up,
right next to
right
it.
in the creek.
Yeah.
What is the status? We'd talked about a CIP last year for the Buckeye Creek.
Unfortunately,
That was shelved,
yeah, Michelle.
and it's on next year's list for
To be
potential.
Yes. Staff does intend to resubmit that one.
And when we do take care of that erosion, are we going to do something like serpentining the creek, trying to slow down the velocity?
Well, that was what we submitted money for, was not for action, but study. Tell us what the best technique, we need a hydrological expert to come in and look at that stretch and say, here's the best way to deal with it.
The way you've done it in, what is that, Wild Horse Valley? With the rocks and the encasing, that seems very secure now. There's not a lot of erosion there.
It is, that's a robust structure. It's called gabion rock, right? So they put the rock in cages and it's very stable. The problem is what that causes is down cutting. So you keep going deeper and deeper. And if you look at sections of the creek now, it's very, very deep, where normally that would not be the case. So it's scouring the bottom and sending all the sediment.
Especially right along that grassy area, it gets really deep there.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, originally, that creek was down the center of the grassy area.
Like
right?
most creeks, I bet it meandered, just like all the creeks that pass through the baylands and everything else.
And we've seen a lot of erosion on that. Would we ever sacrifice some of that grassy area and move the creek further towards the center, towards its historical location?
I think that's definitely within the realm of possibility and maybe necessary, depending on what the hydrological study ends up telling us. But what we're probably looking at, and I know Actera's working on this, they got a grant to do some vegetation work down there. We had hoped this CIP would coincide nicely with what they're doing. They're going to do some native planting in and around the area, which will help,
Okay.
and no doubt will be part of a long-term solution. But I don't know what this study's going to, I mean, that's why we need it, right? Because I
Is
don't
that-
have the answer.
That wall opposite the interpretive center is almost vertical at
Yeah.
some spots.
Yeah, that's
It's-
right.
I mean, it's not surprising we have a lot of erosion just because it's so steep.
Right. You're absolutely right.
Now, the sheds are at the end of the current valley, or the current property, right?
There's a gap, so there's a row of redwood trees, a parking lot that services the Oak Grove group picnic area, and then the shop.
Is there any long-term desire to move the shop and kind of swap where the shop and the 7.7 is?
We had internally kicked that around as an idea.
Is it just money that, or, yeah.
Yeah.
But if we had the money to do it, would we want to do that? Or is that, we want to keep this 7.7 as a little nook and leave the maintenance shed where it is?
We haven't even gotten to the point where we know we could fit it in there yet. So I think it's premature for me to answer that one. I'm not sure if if operationally you could transport that whole thing, including there's gas there that we just had upgraded. So if you were to pick that whole thing up, it'd be very, very challenging. And whether they
Is
would
it
permit that-
gasoline or
Diesel and gasoline. This is to service our vehicles.
is underground?
It's a vaulted, concrete-bound unit that it just took us like 10 years to get it recertified and rebuilt. Yeah, it's a very, very long process to get it installed. It's much needed because it services both us and Station 8's,
Mhm.
the fire department. So whether we could pick that up and how close and where that would fit, I don't know.
And do you have any feeling, would the neighbors be receptive for that? Would they rather have a maintenance shed or a picnic area, or do you not have any idea?
We did ask. I did speak with Mr. Arriaga's representative, and he was open to the idea, but in general, their chief concerns would still be, privacy and security. But they're open to the idea.
But in some ways, having a maintenance yard where the public can't go would be a buffer to the neighbors.
And then you'd have the
But I
rest
don't
of
know.
the park contiguous. I mean, certainly there are advantages to that. It's just all the the challenges of picking up that entire operation, the weather would fit, and everything else that goes with it.
Okay. And now, how about the Actera greenhouse? If we were starting, if it wasn't there, would we pick that as a spot, or do we know of better spots that we'd put it if we were starting from scratch?
I think what Alex told me was there would be advantages to move that in other places where they could get more sun. So if they were starting from scratch, they would probably choose an area where they could maximize the sun. There are a few challenges there, though. Their proximity to the shop allows for water to be run over. So we'd have to if we moved them too far, we would no doubt have to put in some water lines, which is not insurmountable by any means, but just an added step.
So the shop has electric and it has water, but it doesn't have sewage.
Correct.
And the nearest sewage is at the interpretive center.
No, there is a sewer line that runs up to the Oak Grove picnic area, which is nearby.
Okay, so it's
Yeah.
not that far.
There's a restaurant, right,
It'd be doable, but it's not convenient.
right.
Okay. Okay, yeah, that's all I have. Thank you.
First, just a question of the ad hoc committee and Darren. What are you feeling like the overall timetable is to work through this process to get to a point of making a recommendation? I mean, I'm not going to suggest to hold you to this, but is this a year? Is this 6 months? Is that, what do you think was going to have to go through to get this?
Thoughts on that?
And coupled with that, what's the next step to start down that path?
Honestly, we haven't discussed that, but it would be wonderful, I mean, we're talking about it right now, to be able to have some sort of recommendation by the end of the year, this calendar year. So within the next 6 months, after we've had the opportunity to talk to all the different stakeholders and get we need some very specific information before we can move forward. I mean, the reason our ideas are sort of pie in the sky, just highbrow, is because with regard to the creek and what is actually physically possible with regard to the environmental constraints, what you can and cannot do there, and then being able to attach costs. Because some of the ideas are extremely expensive and probably out of the realm of what's realistic. But that would be my personal desire, to be able to make a firm recommendation before the close of the year. Do you think that's realistic?
I believe so, although I do think we need more public outreach. I think,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, so right now, it's really just been a handful of staff and 2 commissioners kind of thinking, and I think it probably needs to be expanded a little bit more to look at the different options. And probably, as Commissioner Knopper pointed out, if we can do a lot of the heavy lifting homework before to say, okay, here's the possibilities. A lot of these are taken off the plate because of the creek or because of the emergency evacuation route. So then you know what you're playing with, so to speak, and you can kind of move pieces around and say, this is what your real opportunities are. Because right now, those aren't defined.
I also think that it's important for us to have maybe some one-on-one conversations with all the different stakeholders. We're presenting that the dog off-leash, and Commissioner Heatherly and I have already started meeting with stakeholders, and I think that's really important too. So we have that valuable input, so when we do go for public comment, that we've already had those one-on-ones and we have all of the pertinent information at that point. So maybe I think next steps, it makes sense before I mean, certainly open to continued comment, is maybe I'll put together some sort of timeline and measures against that, and then we can present that timeline to everybody in a more succinct manner with
And then maybe
specific goals
Flesh out
against
some of
it.
these ideas. I certainly agree with your comment, Darren, that now's not the time to spend money on fleshing out designs. But that price of $15,000 eventually is well worth the investment. It sounds like a bargain to get, comparative analyses of what each of those would cost. But it has to get more fleshed out and
Right.
down. The only other comment I would make is that I think the idea of doing sort of something there rather than nothing, meaning something distinctive compared to what's going on in the rest of the park, is just a grand idea. So the concept of a pavilion for meeting space, it just makes that always distinctive then from everything else. And we frankly don't need just another meadow there, or just another trail. So I think kind of thinking creatively about that is, right on target. Not sure about picnic space. Do we have a lot of demand for more picnic space? So again, that one, particularly near that other picnic area, seemed, and I don't want to dwell on that specific one, but I'm trying to compare the two of the creativity of a meeting area and an outside pavilion versus a couple more picnic benches. I think that's really right on target in terms of direction.
I was just going to say that I don't think there, and Councilmember Schmidt can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's an urgency necessarily to figure out what we want to do with the space and design it. I think that this is a pretty unique opportunity, and syncing it up with the Parks Master Plan and the outreach that we're doing there in some way makes a little more sense to me than trying to get a recommendation done by the end of the calendar year. I think what is urgent is dedicating it as parkland. We should do that as soon as possible after council comes back on their break, and take our time with with how best to use the space.
Thank you for the presentation. Can you give me a sense of how many of the plants grown there are actually used in the city of Palo Alto versus other places? And I'm referring to the Actera nursery.
Right. It would be, I can give you an estimate, and I have the reports, but not with me. It would be really beneficial to have Alex Von Velt answer this one, if that would be all right with the commission.
Sure.
You know, 70% of the plants that we grow go for our restoration projects, and the bulk of the acreage is in Palo Alto. The other sites we have, Los Altos Burn Preserve in Los Altos Hills, which is just across the way, East Palo Alto, and a little bit along San Francisco Menlo Park. So even if it's not in Palo Alto, it's pretty much your direct neighbors. And the 30% that aren't for restoration projects are for farmers or for land managers or also for private citizens. So when we do the plant sales up with the CNPS at Hidden Villa, the California Native Plant Society, we get a lot of homeowners there, many of which are Palo Alto residents. But if I were to guess at a percentage right now that we're going directly into Palo Alto sites, I'd probably say something on the order of like 40%.
When you say 40%, do you mean
Of all
of
the plants
everything
we
there?
grow.
Okay.
But I'd have to look for the exact numbers, but that's about the right scale.
Okay, thank you. So at some point, I think we'd all like to see more information on that, because I just want to point out, I guess people probably realize this, but when the land was deeded to us, I think it was back in 1981 for conservation. We didn't have a nursery there. We didn't have the Actera. My understanding is Actera Nursery's been there about 10 years. Is that right? A little less. So I think the original intent of this land was to have more of an open space and not necessarily a developed area for a nursery. So I'm really interested in, as plans go forward, to envision that area with and without the Actera Nursery there. I think it's really important for the visioning process to not assume that Actera will be there in the future. I know we have a good relationship with them, but I don't want to limit the vision for that land. Personally, I think it's short-sighted to do that with such a amazing opportunity here. And it could well be that we fold that operation into the space, but I would hate to see it constraining visioning for that area.
Any other comments, questions?
Actera still has a nursery down the Baylands?
No, that's not Acteris, that's Save the Bays.
Save the Bays. Okay. The plants growing up in Foothills Park, can they only be growing up in the hills? And so if we found some spot like the Baylands, would you be able to grow the same plants there, or would that not be possible?
No, it's a little tiny switch right there. No, no, this.
We could grow the plants wherever, obviously a sunnier spot is easier than a really shady spot, but if it was down in the Baylands, that would be feasible as well. And there was some discussion about the Buckeye Creek project, the CIP that I know was deferred. We've also been pursuing other options for funding as well, and so most recently I did have a meeting with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services that's really interested and devoting some funding to studying that site, because if it really is an alignment not only with restoring, because it's a steelhead stream, but also dealing with the sediment downstream. So that is something we're continuing to pursue.
Thank you.
I would like to add too that the restoration of a property like that is definitely not the easiest thing, and I think it fits well that the nursery does sit in that location, because the eyes of those that are actually probably growing the plants and will be maintaining them are very close to that location. So for a long-term projection of the restoration itself, I think it behooves the site that the Actera site stays there just to help the restoration, just because those eyes, the plants that they're growing, will probably be the only location where we could get those plant materials. So I would consider that too in the long run of the development of the site. Just because it's restored doesn't mean it's restored and then it's back to itself again. It'll take decades probably to really restore that land, and it's better to have those that are really invested in that be close and have their eyes on it as much as possible. So
I guess my comment would be, we shouldn't be in too much of a hurry to get to the steady state, and that Actera is there, they're being useful. I don't see any reason to kick them off, and I would, even if down the road we don't want them there, I don't see any rush to get rid of them.
Let's see, just a question from an earlier discussion. You mentioned that within 100 feet of the Buckeye Creek, you probably don't want any intense use. Yet you say that the maintenance yard goes right up to the creek. Is that?
The same is true with the Actera nursery, it's right next to it. The municipal codes that I had pointed out to me, these are 1840, 140 stream corridor protection, and 1840, 150. They highlight a few limitations, and there are exceptions, like with permission from the planning department head. But it calls out a few things like parking lots that shouldn't be right adjacent to riparian areas. But there were exceptions, and I assume that's how both the shop went in. Of course, that went in some 30 years ago. But the Actera nursery, it doesn't quite meet, it's not in the same category as a parking lot. And so I'm sure that's how it got its permission. But there were certain limitations is what I meant to call out.
Just one other comment. I guess one of the key stakeholders is the public, who has not even been aware that they own the park, and maybe at some point just having a weekend where the public can get in and look, you might get some good feedback.
Is there any legal issue of having the public go on the 7.7? I mean, it's not parkland. City land, there's no issues.
Once we dedicate it, it's parkland. And that would probably, it would make sense to have a welcome
Oh, yeah.
to,
I think it'd be a very good idea. I'm just worried about the details and the lawyers.
Yeah, security is important.
Okay, so that's a lot of information. It sounds like the next step is you'll be back to talk to us about the survey conclusions, and you're going to identify what further constraints there may be, and have a strategy perhaps for outreach. And when do you think that might come back to us?
Can we get back to you on that?
Yep, you sure can. If there are there any other comments or questions, or should we move on to the next?
I just had a point of clarification. So I did want to know, I think you were getting at what the next steps are for the ad hoc. Do you see those next steps as I'm also really interested in when we're going to do the public outreach. And so can you go into more detail about how you think that fits in to the next steps?
Yeah, I guess my game plan would be convene with the two commissioners working on this one, lay out kind of our timeline on when we could meet with the stakeholders. I really like that concept. Sit down with the stakeholders independently first, then pull in a group where we send out an invite to basically all our open space interested people, everyone we can. Publicly issue this community meeting, probably something like that. Meet down at the site where we've got staff hosting it, so these people who perhaps have never been back in there could. We did that previously at the previous commission meeting up at Foothills Park. So there were people in attendance that weren't on the commission that we welcomed into the area. And we could do the same as long as we have staff present, and I get to discuss it with the neighbors before, just to be fair, even if that was preceding the ordinance making it dedicated parkland. So the exact timeline, I'm not quite sure yet. I think that would come after I convene with the ad hoc committee and we figure that out. But yes, we meet with them, talk with the stakeholders, hold a public community meeting on site is kind of what I'm envisioning.
And what is the earliest you would imagine this could be approved as parkland? When would that go before the does the city council have to vote on that?
Yes.
So what is the earliest that would happen?
Roughly, it would be June 10th that we have the survey work completed. That's if everything goes smoothly. It would go to the county for reading and analysis for 20 days. We'd put together the paperwork. Director Betts and I would work on that, and we'd bring it to the next available council meeting. So
August?
Probably, to play it safe. I mean, some of that's kind of up in the air, but probably in August. And we'll be working, that again is our kind of primary focus right now. So that'll be the first priority before we start investigating too heavily in these other stakeholder meetings and things. My first point of focus will be completing that dedication.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to number 3, which is still number 3, public outreach plan for keeping the public informed about Parks and Rec Commission discussion and action items. And that's Darren Anderson and Ed Sloan. Would you like to speak to the Foothills? Yes. Sure. Yeah, we're just wrapped it up, but go ahead and we'll take comments now.
It's at 8:05, we were here. Now what? So we should just go ahead and speak to you?
Yes, that would be great. Thank you.
All right. Got a bunch of these, and I'll just keep one.
Looks like they're the same. Here's some more, same.
Okay, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay.
Whenever you're
Well,
ready.
thank you for letting us speak. We looked at the agenda and thought we had time. Chair Hederly and members of the commission, I'm really pleased that the City Council has initiated dedication of the 7.7 acres as part of Foothills Park in accordance with the express wishes of the donor. I hope that you will recommend that the council proceed with this dedication immediately, and that you will take a broad look at how this 7.7 acres can best be integrated into Foothills Park. It seems to me that a good starting point is to review the former lease with John Arriaga to see if it required remediation for the damage caused by their use and occupancy for many years. It would also be good to review the August 1st, 2005 license agreement with Actera to understand how that 0.53 acre nursery relates to both the 7.7 acres and to Foothills Park. I believe that the purpose of the agreement was to have the city and Actera cooperate in the preservation, protection, and enhancement of the 7.7 acres. Actera has been there 9 years now, so they should be able to report the results of their efforts on the 7.7 acres. Going forward, the Parks Commission should, through your planning for the 7.7 acres, provide some guidance to staff and Actera regarding necessary remediation and enhancement of the parcel. It's really exciting to have this valuable addition to Foothills Park. And just, I would like to add a little aside. Do you guys not have minutes anymore?
We do.
Because on the,
We have verbatim minutes now.
on the website, it says agendas, but it doesn't say agendas. And
With the agendas, you have to go.
well,
to
I
the
clicked on the agendas and it didn't show. Anyway, I'll figure it out.
Can I do the same?
Yes.
Okay. Well, first I have to find out if I can read this. Well, did you get my email that I sent you? Okay. I'm never sure it goes through when you do stuff like that. Okay. Anyway, I'm asking you to please dedicate the 7.7 acres as soon as possible. It's been 2 months since the City Council directed staff to prepare an ordinance. It's been 33 years since Lee made the offer, and it's been 18 years since it could have been dedicated. We might say the Palo Alto staff has been rather remiss. And I would say, don't forget that this is public land and that it belongs to the people, not any one group or person. And if you give this 7.7 acres back to the people, you should hold hearings, and, it could be kind of fun. Now, none of you probably remember, but Palo Alto, within the last 15 years, was reprimanded by the grand jury because Palo Alto was not seriously complying with the Charter Amendment, Chapter 8, of the Park Dedication Ordinance. And the Palo Alto city manager at that responded very positively. He said, it won't happen again. So let's help Palo Alto do better here. Anyway, this is my whole file, only it's not really. There's a drawer. It's talking about the 7.7 acres. And it includes the ordinance, which was written 33 years ago when Palo Alto accepted the 7.7 acres from the Lee Trust. And let's see what else here. Okay. Well, I think Emily has said other things that I would have said too, so kind of agree with her there that I remember when we all toured the 7.7 acres, and it wasn't very clear that any renovation of that land had occurred at all. It was pretty compact and hard. So I think that 9 years, maybe we should have had a little more progress than we saw there. So anyway, dedicate away. Thank you.
Okay, now we will move on to item number 3, public outreach.
Good evening, Darren Anderson again. The public outreach concept of putting out a policy for how we would conduct it stemmed from our retreat. When we last met, we discussed this idea. Are we doing it consistently, and are we reaching the stakeholders and necessary parties that should be involved when we hold public meetings? A couple people showed up, I believe, at a commission meeting and said, hey, wait a minute, I never heard about this. Why wasn't I notified? And that kind of spurred this idea of we should formalize this, make it universal, and make sure we're all applying it for every project the same. And that way we could each respond whenever that comes up to say, well, this is what staff did. We sent out these mailers, we did these emails. If you want to get on this list, this is how you do it. And so rather than being informal, we started this. I put together a draft that was circulated to the commission. I believe you have a copy with just some general ideas, really, really rough draft, and then met with Commissioner Lowing and Chief Communication Officer Claudia Keith to kind of suss this out and see if we could fine-tune it. We made some edits, and the edits were incorporated in the draft that you saw. Again, the real idea is to just have a formula that I can use time and time again and kind of use it universally. When we did Commissioner Lowing and I checked in with Claudia to see if she had any additions that she wanted to make. She had briefed us that she had a social media team coming on board soon, and that they might have some new information that would affect this. When I reached out to her again to say, hey, I'm going back to the commission really shortly, do you have any ideas? She said that now they're working on a larger citywide strategy that will include how we reach out to residents at the local level. So she suggested that we could have some general outreach strategies and we could add some more details later. So, well, I guess I didn't fully get the scope of what she's putting together, but I envision it would be citywide. And this document was really intended to be CSD-wide. I still think it's probably a good idea. I have no idea on how long they're going to take to put something out, but I don't see why we couldn't have a CSD one that might be able to fit in and mesh with whatever broader citywide scope we're going to have. So I still think there's value in gathering your feedback on this draft, but knowing in the back that there might be a larger city effort to do something very similar that may affect how this is implemented and finalized.
I'm just going to add a couple of points from the meeting. Darren stepped up as usual and did great work on putting a draft together, and we did meet and do some edits. The one thing I want to point out is that in here we talk about large and/or significant community interest projects as opposed to anything else, and didn't bother to go into a lot of wordsmithing to define that. So if eventually we need to do that, we'll do that. But it's conceptually, there's big ones and there's small ones, and the small ones just aren't that big a deal. So just pointing that out at this point. And then very importantly, and without any edit from certainly me as a commissioner, on the second page, it's noted that in the middle, an important aspect of staff's role at community meetings is to understand and record public comment so that staff can transmit community input to decision makers. And that's just a really critical statement of, what the city's signing up to do in these kinds of meetings. So tonight is literally just to get any immediate feedback on this draft.
Commissioner comments? Commissioner Hepburn?
Yeah. Thank you for doing this. I think it's really great to put on paper a policy so there's a consistent, concise methodology behind every means of communication with regard to projects that we would be working on. And I like the idea that the city is thinking about it on a broader approach so that we certainly would integrate into their system. So it is very consistent, so you don't have people feeling like that they aren't communicated to in a certain way, especially neighborhood by neighborhood. The only comment that I would say, modes of outreach, maybe add a bullet point when appropriate, in-person intercepts. When we had the MIG meeting, I really love the idea of when it's appropriate and it makes sense. We certainly do enough wonderful community events that having people out there with clipboards and just people that might be difficult to reach otherwise, but at the chili cook-off, they're all there, kind of thing. So that was my only comment, but I just wanted to say thank you really for putting all of this good thinking behind it.
Rob?
When appropriate. Thank you, Darren, and for working on this. I think it's great too. One thing that I get stuck on a little bit is that CSD isn't always in control of the project or the public outreach, and so and Darren, we hadn't talked about this yet, but as I was reading this over the weekend, I felt like that Public Works and Planning and Community Services ought to adopt the same policy, because, at times, we've been caught by surprise, maybe Public Works has too, if we're doing an outreach, particularly related to Parks and Recreation, because both those departments work on these items, that they ought to be included in the policy, I would say.
That makes a ton of sense. Commissioner Ashland?
I have a number of questions, sort of comments. I'm not sure how you want to do it. If I should just go through them and we can talk about them now or talk about them later.
Well, we have about 15 minutes left for this topic, so why don't you do all your stuff, and
I'll
we'll
just
just
put
move
it
down
out.
the line, make sure everybody gets a chance.
Okay, great. I'll just put it out there. It seemed like through starting with the public outreach as the name of the policy, it seemed like the term of community outreach and public outreach were somewhat used interchangeably, and I wasn't sure if one was more correct than the other, or if we should be consistent there. So that was my first question that I wasn't sure about. In the first paragraph of the background section, on the second sentence, it says to encourage residents to follow development activity in their neighborhoods and actively participate. And I really felt that residents don't just want to follow activity in their neighborhoods, but also the city as a whole is of interest to the residents of Palo Alto.
Can you help me? I missed that, on which paragraph you're on?
Oh, the very first paragraph of the background section, the second line of it is, basically about following development activity in neighborhoods.
And broader community, or?
I thought, and city as a
And
whole.
city as a whole.
Would,
Well, you understand where that's coming from, which is that we're not going to send out notices to everybody about any project that's in the neighborhood. Right.
Sure, city is committed, but, right, so it reads, city is committed to providing information and opportunities to encourage residents to follow development activity in their neighborhoods. For example, if something is impacting a park where you play soccer, but it's not where you live, or impacting downtown, or impacting where you frequently grocery shop, even our public schools, 3 of them are lottery schools, so people drive to them. So there's a lot of things that aren't necessarily related to where you live in your neighborhood that residents would be very interested in following. So I didn't want to just say, if it's not in the where you live, that just seemed to be lacking to me. Again, I'm just throwing it out there, that we want to encourage residents to follow development as a whole, as opposed to just neighborhood developments, but take it as you will, if that's okay. And this is the second question I have, is in the second paragraph, is dissemination of information related to development activity and to encourage early and frequent communication between city and staff. The question I had was, are we encouraging communication alone, or like we talk and you talk and we talk, and you talk, we're both communicating with each other as opposed to communication and responsiveness? So I wasn't sure if that was something where, when the public puts out communication, would we indicate a response to the communication, or do we just sort of gather it and there's no follow-up on that?
I think my intent was the communication occurs on the two-way platform at a community meeting. That's where the opportunity presents itself, more so than even a commission meeting where there's not a lot of open dialogue. Whereas this opens that window up, as well as puts them into contact with the point person. So if I'm leading the restoration at Scott Park, and we have a public meeting, now they have a person, a name, a phone number, and an email to go directly to the source. And that's kind of where I was coming at with that line. But if you think it should be edited,
I feel strongly about that, so that makes sense.
I like the word dialogue. That'd be good to me.
You could say you can just add in and dialogue.
after frequent communication, or where are we at? Encourage early and.
Somewhere in there, where
Yeah.
do you think it fits?
Yeah, communication and dialogue.
Sure.
So let's try to do a little less wordsmithing if we can, just get the concepts out, because I'm worried about the time.
Okay. Third paragraph, second sentence, it says, meet the objectives of improving communication. And I'm not sure if it belongs here, but it seemed a little vague to me when we talk about improving communication without any indication of measurement. So if we're meeting objectives that aren't quantified, I'm not sure how we can meet them. And the the ending of that sentence, and this phrase is used more than once, it says, provide the community with as much advance notification as possible. No, this actually says advance notification of proposed projects, which is okay, but it later says advance notification of community meetings. if a resident is told that 6 months from now there will be a meeting, but they don't hear a reminder a week or two before, it's not necessarily as much as, it might be something along the lines of as much advance notification and timely reminders or something along those lines, if that makes sense. Under goals and objectives, it begins again with public outreach, and this is where I got into, is there a difference between public outreach and community outreach? Because those phrases go back and forth. And it says with the intent of involving interested parties. My suggestion would be to add informing and involving, because sometimes you don't know if you want to be involved if you aren't informed about what the issue is. And on the tail end of that paragraph, it says a timely review of a project through a predictable process. I wasn't sure if we would want to say predictable and transparent, or something like that. That was a suggestion. And skipping, that one I already said. The last sentence of the purpose and intent paragraph under community meetings says provide stakeholders opportunity to be informed about decisions that may affect them, and I would suggest inserting the words informed about and contribute to decisions that may affect them. And the next paragraph, and maybe this is, Ed, what you were referring to when it begins with large and/or significant.
Correct.
That it wasn't defined, so we're leaving that until later? Or we're assuming that large is clear?
That's a valid debate, is what I was saying.
Okay.
And that there's nice to have some flexibility there. If staff's reasonably confident through our interactions with the public that a particular program would not benefit or require a public meeting, it's nice to have flexibility, not to just say, hey, it doesn't matter, you're holding one, that's what the policy says. So building in a little flexibility and staff discretion is advantageous.
Okay, and then there's something that read a little strange in that sentence to me, that where it said large and/or significant community interest projects or proposals. It didn't seem that the projects themselves were community interest projects, as opposed to people may be interested, people from the community may be interested, but the projects themselves are not necessarily community interest projects. Projects are just projects. So that phrase seemed to be in the wrong place.
These seem to me a lot of word choice and meaning edits, and I think it might be helpful if you could email those to Darren, because it's not something we need to discuss here at the table, but if there are,
Sure.
if you have broader questions or comments about kind of the gist of the document, I know it's going to be revised again and will come back before us again. That'd be great.
Oh, okay, yeah, those, I think I've already hit at the things that are the gist, and I can be glad to email the rest.
Thank you. Commissioner Rector.
The 600-foot radius, it seems very small to me. I mean, there's parks maybe a mile apart, which means there's a lot of people that are going to be a half mile away from the nearest park. And I think I would want to, I don't want to kill trees with postcards, but I would want to make that radius bigger. And/or have a citywide email list. Whenever there's anything to do with parks, I would love to get a notice in my inbox saying whether, as Stacy mentioned, people go around, whether they're playing soccer or dropping their kids off at school. They quite often use parks all over town. It'd be nice just to be able to park mailing list, and email is cheap.
I just wanted to feed that. You're absolutely right. The 600 is an absolute minimum. Typically, we double that. Typically, it's 1,200. I think the 600 was pulled. I did a little research to what other municipalities were doing. That was their minimum. I just kind of borrowed it. But we could certainly increase that. I mean, what we actually do probably is closer to the minimum being 1,200, so we could easily change that if you like.
I'm not within 1,200 feet of any park, so I don't get notified of any park activity at all.
We also, in this, I believe, is that suggestion, at least Commissioner Lowing and I discussed it extensively, that the email list for people who want to be notified is really the first priority. That'll be the optimum mode of communication for us.
Yeah, that's in there at the top.
Yeah.
Maybe.
The other thing is that.
Oh, I was just going to say, that might work with what you're saying, Keith, is the intercepts are soliciting people to opt in to email.
Yeah, I think
Like, we're
that's
not talking about a
very good idea.
specific issue, but we're going out
Thanks, really.
to the parks, the users of the parks, the constituents, and saying, hey, we want to talk to you. And we'll only send you pertinent information. We won't spam you with needless stuff. Sorry for interrupting.
This could also, this very meeting could very well serve as something that we have every time. So if you came to a commission meeting and you wanted to sign up for that parks email distribution list, you could opt in here, and that might be a good option too. But we'll continue to look for those opportunities as staff.
That's a good idea. And finally, the neighborhood associations have emailed us already, so I would reach out to any neighborhood association nearby and let them broadcast it out. Because maybe people don't want to be on every park, but they just want the neighborhood parks, and that'd be a way of just getting the neighborhood informed. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Just a quick comment on that last one. Commissioner Lowing, we discussed that with Claudia. Do you recall her comments on that? Yeah. Great.
Oh, yes, very good. Thank you.
I'm really glad you're doing this. As I was reading this, I had trouble knowing what we do now versus what you're proposing. So is there something that you can just highlight in here, what is new in here?
Yes, thank you. Good question. We don't have an email distribution list, so that would be brand new. Something we do it per project. So we have a public meeting, people sign up as they've come to the meeting, and now I email that group for that project, and then that's kind of the end of it. And that's been a source of contention for a lot of people, saying, hey, I came to such and such meeting, and I never heard back regarding everything else that's going on in the city. And we said, okay, this is what we need then. We need a parks-wide email distribution list. So that'd be new. We already do website updates. We send out the mail postcards. We do on-site meetings, notices, so we put signs up in the park. So most of these are already happening. Social media will be kind of a newer element. Typically, we have not added anything to Facebook. And then notice in the paper, I believe that's only been very, very large projects, and I haven't participated in one where we needed to do that. But that will certainly be a new one.
Okay, that sounds really good. I think that email, the top one under modes of outreach, is really critical, and I'm glad you're going that direction. So, what will the sign up procedure be like? Are people going to go? How are we going to advertise this so people know they can sign up? And it seems very important how you present this, so that people know what they're signing up for.
Right. What I envisioned was a document that kind of talks about a summary of what this means. You're signing up and what this means. You're going to get email notifications for every park renovation. You're going to get emails for new park policies. And there'll be 4 examples. The no smoking in parks. That'd be of interest. The no feeding of wildlife. All those things that aren't necessarily a park-specific one, you'd still get on the list. And so I'd have a bunch of examples and then an opportunity to write in your name and email and other contact information.
And are you going to float the idea through the neighborhood association list and advertise this new modality for communication?
Yes.
Okay, that sounds really good. I also have heard on occasion certain of our stakeholders don't feel like they're followed up with. So a stakeholder might not get noticed of an important topic. And so does this policy have to do with anything specific to stakeholders? I don't quite know how it's a bit of a mysterious process to me, how you decide who the stakeholders are, and how you, can there be a place on our website where people can sign up as a stakeholder? I don't really know how that should work.
To be honest, it's been kind of one of those things that's like a relationship. I've interacted with people over a number of years. They've called me many times. They've offered insight. They become a partner, if you will. And it's a long-term commitment to a park or something. Those are typically the people I've reached out to because I know they've got a sustained interest in a particular project or area. So those have been the ones. We have had opt-in ones in the past. It just hasn't been universal. For example, there's a Friends of the Baylands Nature Preserve, and there's 25 people or so on that. I think you're probably one of them. And so that core group, I've had people stop in and say, hey, I'd like to be added, and we do so. We add them to the list. So It's a mix. People can opt in certainly by talking to me. If I know that someone comes to all the meetings, they're really interested, I reach out to them. It goes both ways.
So it sounds like an art, and it sounds like you spend a lot of time on it, which I appreciate. So as you're working through this, if there's any way to codify that a little bit, it might be interesting to present it to us, up to your decision on that, but it just might be interesting. And I had one more question. It just slipped my mind. I might come back to it at the very end.
I have a couple questions about the email list also. I do think it's really important that we actively invite people to opt in. Don't just wait and hope that it happens. And that includes all the groups that have been mentioned before. I wonder if there's any way, and I don't know technologically or labor intensively, whether it's possible to have like a checkbox when you opt in, I'm interested in projects and announcements about parks, or just about Midtown neighborhood, or just about recreation. And that might create a tree, so we're not blasting everybody with all of the information, but some people who really want to just have one can just get the one. I don't know how that works.
That's an excellent point. I think you're right. That probably would be the Cadillac of email outreach version. Unfortunately, I just don't have I don't have a Cadillac. So this would most likely look like, there were fancier options, and maybe Claudia Keith, I mentioned earlier, is working on a bigger thing, a bigger citywide endeavor for outreach. She might have that Cadillac. But this looks more like me emailing that group every time to parcel it out for the per neighborhood, or because I get a lot of that. I'm only interested in Scott. I don't want to hear about the other stuff. And I thought, that makes it so difficult. I've got to maintain all these subgroups. It was challenging, not impossible, but it's going to be a very, very heavy staff load if we implement it, at least right now, under kind of that format. But it's certainly something I think we could, if Ms. Keith had mentioned a few programs that do this kind of public outreach for you, and I think it has a higher level of discerning what you want to be involved in and selecting boxes and things. So I think that's an option for the future, but right now, probably not.
Okay. My other question is probably also a Cadillac question. Is there any way to notify the subscribers of action by other groups, by planning, transportation, by the council, et cetera, on issues related to stuff that we've already blasted them emails about? So that's something to think about. And finally, it would be great to also be able to email out the commission packet each month when it goes on the website. I don't know if that's something that all these groups would be interested in. But then they'd know what we were talking about, and they'd have the packet to understand what the issue is. If they're interested, we might get more people to come and participate in our meetings, which is a useful forum if they know about it and come. And that was it for me. Commissioner Cromie.
I just was wondering, Darren, if you'd be willing to give us an example where you thought the outreach worked really well.
Let's see. Commissioner Lowing and I discussed some of those that have been beneficial. I think perhaps the Lytton noise ordinance. It was a lot of, that one's a good highlight of how the stakeholder system worked. I had a group of stakeholders representing the musicians, and I had a group of stakeholders representing the surrounding business owners. And so that was excellent in that regard. It did not end up being one of those broadcast leaflets because it was a downtown area and not a lot of residents in and around there. But so that was a good example of the stakeholder process working well. And how we identified those was a combination of going out there and talking to the musicians. So being on site to with that clipboard and saying, hey, I see you jamming out here. Are you interested? Would you be willing to work with us? And then working through the bid, for example, is how I found the other group of stakeholders, people who own businesses who were interested. Other ones that have worked well where we did your traditional outreach, perhaps our last time we held an El Camino meeting when we had to outreach in terms of finding out how the lighting would impact people. We did a lot of sending out of everything. We emailed, we went down to the residents and talked to the residents of the condominiums that were going to be impacted by the light shining through. We didn't have a big turnout to the actual meeting itself, but I didn't have anyone come back and say, hey, wait a minute, I never heard about this, or I heard after the fact. We had done our homework and we did enough outreach that people had an opportunity. So we had field folks, and they knew, they had all been emailed, they had all been talked to. So I think that was one where I think it worked well, even though the end result wasn't a massive community meeting.
So that's what I was thinking,
Yeah.
working on a master plan. Peter?
Lincoln Auto works well again because it's based on a stakeholder structure where we know the people have an invested interest in it.
It-
So yes, and they're then tied to the project and they promote that project for their groups, so their groups turn out, and it becomes then a way to have outside groups then promoting the meetings. Right, exactly. So that definitely helps out in that respect. But just, I would say from, I should probably talk on the microphone. From the public works standpoint, where's the switch? There it is. Are we on there? Okay. I still don't hear anything, but. Okay. So from the public works standpoint, we also feel that the 600 feet radius is a very tiny little area, actually. So for the projects that we've worked on, including Party Park, Monroe Park, we have community meetings tomorrow for King Plaza and for Bowden Park. We usually send between 1,200 and 1,500 postcards out. We usually send an email out to the specific Pan neighborhood to allow that information to go out. It's also advertised twice before the meeting in the newspaper. That gives a broad blanket basically out to the public to attend the meetings. However, most of the time, the meetings, they aren't overly well attended. So I would say tomorrow, for like, say, Bowden Park's the meeting, I believe we sent out about 1,400 postcards to the areas around there. I would guesstimate that maybe 20 people will come, but could be as less as 5 or maybe even 3 people. So it is a tough thing, the outreach, to get it going and to attract basically people to come to the events. So.
Yeah,
Just
I think,
a little- oh, sorry, go
I
ahead.
think it'd be worthwhile at the event to ask people, how did you hear about this? And that might be good anecdotal evidence to see what's being effective.
I just had one comment on the Rinconada meetings. That's an excellent example of an incredibly robust outreach. There was a lot of community outreach and a lot of community meetings held for this master plan. And still, people came up after the fact and said, hey, I never heard about it. I never got a chance. So even under the most robust one, that's still a problem. And no matter how perfect this policy becomes, it's something to be cognizant of.
Very, very fair, taking into consideration.
Thank you.
Okay, so what are our next steps here then?
Sure. Next steps, I think, would be I can sit down with Commissioner Lowing if you're available, and we can hash through this and add these edits and take any people's emails that come forward with this and come back to you with a revised draft. I'll probably flush it through both planning and Public Works has already seen this copy and weighed in, but we'll give them a second review and see if we can get them to add their thoughts and maybe even adopt it on as a policy for them as well.
And connect with Claudia. Yes, connect with Claudia.
And then you'll come back to us,
Yep.
you think, in June, July?
June or July.
Great, thank you. That moves us to our, oh boy, our new number 4, which was previously number 2. Recommend to council a park improvement ordinance for Monroe Park. And we have Peter Jensen.
Good evening, Commissioners. Peter Jensen, Landscape Architect for the City of Palo Alto. I don't really have a lot to expand on as far as the presentation goes. The plan is the same from the previous time when we looked at it before. This is to approve the park improvement ordinance. My update from our last meeting when we did look at the plan was I have been working with new development, the residents of the new development that were there that would like to have seen a little bit more amenities placed into the playground. We've been working on an upgrade to a playhouse there, and last week I believe we selected the playhouse. So I've sent them a few options, and they've selected a playhouse, has a few little bit more interactive paneling to it to play with. The playground is considered to be a tot lot playground from ages 2 to 5, so that dictates the playhouse structure itself and the activity of what's going along there. There was still some wanting of a slide and a climbing apparatus, but in that area, due to fall zones and the size of that playground area, that's not possible. So I think we came up with a good compromise and got a nice playhouse structure there that adds a little bit more imaginative play to that space that was lacking there before. But other than that, the playground, the park itself, the design is what we looked at before. So we're requesting the commission to adopt the park improvement ordinance.
Thanks. Do we have any questions or comments? This is basically what we saw before, and I think we largely supported it. Any comments?
I live in this neighborhood, and people were pleased by this plan. People came up to me to ask if the canopy is going to be replaced. We had 10 excuse me, we had 10 very mature beech trees that have been cut down in this park, and people are very interested in having that canopy be replaced. And I've talked to Peter about the equivalents in the plan, and they seem to be good. I mean, it's going to take a lot of years, we all know. And then the only other comment I had was on the choice of asphalt versus concrete walkway, and I couldn't remember how that had been framed. If one is better than the other, there's this idea to make it blend more because it is such a small area, to not have sort of an eyesore jumping out at you, to sort of have that pastoral experience in the park as much as possible.
Right. The actual choice between the use of asphalt or concrete will mostly be dictated actually on the bids that we get back. Asphalt has normally been used in parks previously because it is more a cost-effective material than concrete is. However, it is not as long-lived as concrete is. It has a tendency to deteriorate, especially since it's so small and doesn't really have an edge to it. So the pricing that we have been getting back for recent parks, Eleanor Party Park is an example one there. That was actually in the plan as an asphalt pathway to replace the existing asphalt that was there. But due to the scale of and especially Monroe Park, which is even a lot smaller than Eleanor Party Park, the cost for doing the asphalt compared to the concrete came out to be pretty much the same. So that's why then we went towards using the concrete, just because it's a lot longer of a lasting material and requires a lot less maintenance over time. So again, when the construction package is put together, it's going to have that option as well. It's going to be optioned as an asphalt, which they'll bid on, and then there'll be a bid alternate for them to supply numbers for a concrete pathway. And then however the price is dictated will then decide on exactly what that material is going to be.
One question. There's a lot of tree roots under the sidewalk there. Is asphalt thinner than concrete, or is it roughly the same surface preparation? How far do you have to dig down to?
It's the same preparation that goes along with both materials. As far as a subbase goes, it has to have a subbase basing material to it that is somewhere around 6 inches to 4 inches thick, basically, of a compacted base rock. and then the concrete then, or asphalt is laid on top of that.
Okay.
Concrete, again, has structural steel basically inside of it, which controls root growth and the pushing of it around. If the roots do get big enough, definitely the concrete will break and move it around, but not as much as the asphalt does. It is much softer material. And this location, especially since the pathway is in closer proximity to redwood trees, which do have a very shallow root system, but not overly as robust as far as large-scale big roots that do break up concrete goes. So I'm confident in either material, but if the price does come out favorable towards concrete, we would go in that direction.
Thank you.
Do I have a motion?
Just one more comment. The tree that is farthest to the south end on the pathway, it isn't growing straight, so we are just a little bit concerned in the neighborhood that some of the shade from the redwoods were blocking it, so we wanted to just report that back.
I can discuss that with the urban forester, and we can make sure that it's staked properly so it will grow straight. That tree, beech tree, is known to grow fairly straight, so it should be definitely growing straight up. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So this is an action item to recommend to council a park improvement ordinance for Monroe Park. Do I have a motion?
Okay, so I'll motion that we approve this park plan for Monroe Park.
I'll second the motion.
All in favor? Aye. That's unanimous. So there was our speedy consent calendar. Thank you, Peter. That brings us next to original item 4, which is now item 5. Update on the Parks, Trails, Open Space, and Recreation Facilities Master Plan. And the one page you have in your packet is just an updated version of the one we talked about at our last meeting, incorporating everybody's comments.
Let's say it's coming in. Let's put that map from the website up.
Well, I think I have
It was also in that Word document that was I attached to it. And then we'll start over again. Good evening again. Peter Jensen, landscape architect for the city of Palo Alto, here to give you an update on the Parks Master Plan and what is taking place with that. Right now, we're in the segment or phase of the plan where the consultant is basically has done a lot of the on-ground park tours, gotten or received from us all the our information, the comprehensive plan, all the basically city documents that we have that affect or dictate how we use open space and our programs. And they're basically now going through that information and breaking it apart to understand that better, to then get us to the phase where we can start basically putting prioritizations together. So that's basically the consultant is working on that information, and when we get that information, they'll be coming to us back to the commission, which will happen in July, and give a presentation on basically what their findings are, and start to talk about more about the community meetings, which is kind of the next step that are embarking on, which is the community outreach. So I've passed out it's still a tentative schedule, working through it with the consultant to confirm all the dates basically on there, but it kind of gives you a good rough idea of what we're looking at as far as the meetings go. It also has stakeholder meetings and the Park and Recreation Commission meetings on there as well as city council meetings. So it gives a kind of a good rundown of all the meetings that are on there. Staff meetings aren't included in that. I didn't print that aspect out, but it is another phase of this that is part of this list. But I think this gives you a good rundown basically of what we're going to do. Those community meetings are coming up this summer. starting in August. But I think the most pressing one is coming up with the stakeholders group, which will be at the end of June. So those of you that are on the ad hoc stakeholder groups list, you'll be getting your invitation here very shortly. The invitation's going out basically to the stakeholder groups pretty soon to basically kick that off. The other thing that we're working on that I handed out is basically the rough template for the web page. The web page will coincide with the community outreach process. We'd like to get this web page up in the next 3 to 4 weeks, basically. We're using an outside consultant to do that. We feel that this project is large scale enough and is lasting long enough that a more dynamic web page that is a little bit more aesthetically appealing than what we or I can produce myself and operate is necessary. So I've passed around that example of basically what that's going to look at. I also have the sample, which we can look at right now, of the Mapita aspect of the web page, the interactive part of the web page that allows community members who do access the web page to then access the Mapita site and give us some information about parks that they like, things that they don't like, and actually identify it on a plan. So as you can see up on the screen, basically, this is kind of the opening page of the what it's asking you basically on this is to, which parks do you visit in Palo Alto? And really pressing on that allows you then to maneuver this green dot around. So let's just say that Hoover Park was the park then that was selected in this. And then going to save, and then it asks you then a few questions about that. How would you rate the overall quality of the park? And you can easily move basically the slider around and set that. And then how do you usually get there? So then it offers these options as well. So this then helps to identify the parks that people are using, their proximity to how close they're using it and how they're getting there. And gets them into the phase where they're interacting with this, because as it goes on here, and we can scroll down this way.
Select your favorite park too, right? Yeah, there we go.
Right, so then you can also select your favorite park, which may not be the one that you visit the most or the one that's closest to you, and it goes through those basically same questions as well. But then it also now starts to then get you into other questions as you continue down the line, and basically becomes a small survey. So it asks multiple questions. How do you usually get there? Again, are there specific problems at this park? Do you have ideas of improvement of this park? The next page is asking you for places that you like. It doesn't have to be specific to a park. It could just be a place in Palo Alto that you like. There's an opportunity to insert information about parks or problems and opportunities that are associated with our park system. And there's a question about having any barriers, basically. So if you if there's constraints to you moving to a park or getting to a park, there's information about that as well, so we can resolve that as part of the master plan process as well. It then gets into more of a survey type of question, where it's start to ask you more demographic questions about who and what, why you're filling out the basically this aspect of it. All pertinent information to, again, extracting how the community is using the park. And it provides then the opportunity also just to add then feedback that's not associated to a specific question to basically type in comments there. The Mapita thing just came up online because they've been working on the actual maps themselves to get it all correct. So I will send the link to Rob this week, and he'll send it out to you. You guys can have a chance to then go through it. If you have any further questions about it, or think that there's other things that can be added to it, This specifically is not the survey. There will be a survey that will be independent of this to go on. This is more to get really site-specific information and to be more interactive in the webpage so people, when they go there, have something to do. It's much more dynamic that way. I think this could also be a good tool that we could use further on, even past the master planning stage, having this as perhaps part of even the Park and Rec Commission's webpage where it allow people to go to and provide further comment. It seems to be very easy, and now that we have the map produced, something that we could use in the future. So those are kind of the basic things that are being worked on right now. As far as the schedule goes, the consultant will come and do a presentation basically of all the things that they're working on currently in July. I know that Rob and I talked about this today, will be some conversation tonight about if you are going to take a summer hiatus at some point. So we are flexible in that conversation. So if you decide to take July off, then we can do it in August or vice versa. So I also wanted to put that out there as well. And I'll take any questions that you guys may have right now.
Thanks. Do we have any questions or comments? Commissioner Ashland?
Peter, is there any indication, I didn't see anything on there, can they add anything like an asterisk to indicate which questions are required or not? Sometimes people want to skip a gender or demographic question like that, or even have a third option that said decline to state or something like that.
No, none of the answers are required to be filled out for you to proceed to the next phase of it. So if you do decide not to answer, if you only wanted to answer your favorite park and that was basically as far as you wanted to go, then that would be your prerogative to do that.
Great, thanks.
The standard questions are going to include communication preferences. Do you want to sign up for the email here? How do you want to get in contact if park is being? That'd be me.
Well, I think to go along with what Mr. Anderson was talking about earlier about the outreach too, I think this is a prime opportunity to start building the email list basically that we would like to use. So yes, you'll be able to sign up on the web page itself, as well as we'll be taking all the web addresses from those that participate in the community meetings or the intercept groups, or so that will be a function of this process as we go along. We'll be building a mailing list basically that will be really composed of those that are truly concerned or about the parks basically. So
from a communication standpoint, is there any desire to have a Twitter feed or a Facebook page and other I don't say non-traditional, but not old fogey ways of getting into communicating?
And I think Darren touched on it in the previous agenda item that Claudia Keith, who's our new public outreach person, has now a group just looking at basically the social outreach aspect of it. We are going to have a conversation with her next week basically about that, of the other avenues to use, Twitter, Facebook, and those things, and how they can then be linked to this and all incorporated together. So I imagine that will definitely be an aspect that will link back to this page as well. So.
And we do have a recreation Facebook page that's pretty popular. We have a parks Facebook page. We have a Twitter feed out of Open Space Rangers that gets a lot of activity, and then Aquatics has a Twitter feed as well. So we'll use all of those to get people to access this survey.
Just so we can keep all of our surveying clear, what are we naming this survey that you went over today?
This is MAPITA.
Okay, it's not on our list. Is it on our
No,
list?
it's not on that specific list of dates. No, it is not.
And it's called MAPITA because that's the software it's using?
Exactly.
Okay.
And I think it's just based more on like a map navigational system, so that's the name they decided to give it.
Okay, and I think it's really important on any survey to ask people what they like. So I noticed I would email you separately once you send it to me, but I just thought I would say it publicly. I think it's really important that people don't only get to talk about issues, problems, but we really need a database of what people like. And thank you for sending that to us. It'll be fun. So we should expect that in the next month?
No, in the next few days.
Next few days. Okay, thank you.
If I could just put a plea in for your schedule. You say someone's asking for a meeting with the council in the fall, and you're not sure you want to do that, what do you have, and so on. The council is involved in the update of the comprehensive plan. And their deadline is the same as yours. Now, it seems to me if a master plan has some relevance to the comp plan has been grappling with issues like size of the city, land use, density, congestion, funding sources, and parks and open space has to be part of that thinking process. And I think if you could have some intersection between the comprehensive plan and your master plan, it would be so valuable for both sides. It doesn't have to be, oh, here's what it is, but maybe it's, here are the three issues, big issues we're grappling with. And we could do the same thing from the comp plan. Here are the issues we're grappling with. And gee, the density says we need more parkland or more facilities or something. So being aware of that in September is better than discovering that in January. So I think it's worthwhile having whatever you call it, a preliminary meeting, exchange of ideas, issue statements or something, I think would be very valuable for both sides.
What is the council date for the comp plan?
We're supposed to vote final approval by December of 2015. So it's right after you want us to adopt the master plan in September or October. And so if there's any chance for interaction, it has to be before that, or you're still grappling with the issues.
So in that case, would there be, are we talking about 2 meetings before council? I'm a little bit confused here. So city council meeting,
December 2015, is that right, Councilmember Schmidt?
For the comp plan.
The comp plan,
The
yeah.
final adoption of the comp plan.
Yeah.
So, of the comprehensive plan, yeah.
Right.
So it probably has to be ready by September
Which-
to.
So the timing is really good, I would think, of the Parks Master Plan to feed into the update of the comprehensive.
As a matter of fact, no, I think the draft comp plan has to be ready by March or April of 2015.
Okay.
So you
Ooh.
go through the EIR process.
okay, March or April.
So it's really this calendar year that we ought to be feeding into.
Yes, this year is this fall.
Which is, that's when most of the outreach is.
Because right here, your first bullet, Peter, do you mean, so November 24, is that a 2013? Are you referring back to a previous council meeting?
No, that would be 2014. That would be this calendar year.
November 2014?
Yes.
So there's a,
Council requested, that was probably 2013.
yeah, if you can just put a year on that first bullet point. So in 2013, they requested another meeting before the January 2015. Let's have years on here because it's too confusing otherwise.
That's very close to when we will vote the preliminary comprehensive plan,
In January.
probably February or March. So if there's going to be any input, it has to take place in the fall.
So you're requesting that they come to you in the fall of 2014? No, we just need years attached to, we have no years on this so can you just reiterate what year you're hoping they would come to you? is it the fall of this year, 2014? Okay, so in the fall.
The content from the consultant in July, so maybe August or early September would be a good time. And that would still be able to have an impact on how we think about our issues of density and development patterns.
So is there anything we can do as a commission to support that calendar so that we can involve city council earlier when it matters most?
No, we can just move the data. In our original RFP that went out, it basically stated the dates, and then the consultant then put a calendar together for those dates. When we went to the study session with council in February, they asked to have a meeting sooner than basically the January meeting. That was supposed to be the first meeting that was on the agenda. We are recommending now that we have one, and I just had thrown out the date November 24th. But if and I'll discuss this with Mr. Turner about that, who's overseeing the comp plan. We can move that forward though and have it in September or earlier than that to give ample time to get feedback basically from the council.
Yeah, both sides to learn.
So the draft that's due in March, is that an 80% draft, a 99% draft? What,
Of the comp plan.
of the comp plan?
That's an approved draft, which then goes through the EIR process.
Means that it,
Is it legal? Is it acceptable? Is it breaking?
so if there are any major changes to it, then it has to go back through the EIR again, probably.
No, I don't think so. There's a summary process that takes place that accepts changes.
Okay.
But yeah, it's not the final. That's why you do have a final vote in December.
And then that final will go through EIR again?
No, there's one EIR process, but it deals with the issues that came up during the EIR.
Right, the
Fine.
EIR allows people to basically make comment on that, and then those comments then must be addressed in the final draft, basically, must discuss the comments that were made and then how those comments are being addressed now in the actual final report goes.
Okay, so we wanted it to be as mature as possible, just so the EIR and the comments can be, we don't want to wait till the last minute and just surprise people. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, especially if there are big issues that you are dealing with that should be dealt with inside the context of the comp plan. Those should be surfaced as early as possible.
I just have one tiny thing to add as pertaining to the stakeholder meetings. I'm not on that ad hoc committee, but I think it might be useful for those committee members to have a list of who the stakeholders are before they meet. Any other comments on this topic? No? Okay, thank you, Peter. We'll move on to item number 6, ad hoc committee report on shared use dog parks.
I actually forgot one comment because I was focused on one page, but Peter, on your previous page, your handout park priorities for the Prost master plan, can you have a bullet point under supply demand issues? Can you add in community gardens and food sharing? Because we have an ad hoc working on that, and I just wanted to make sure it's represented on your list as well. Thank you.
Okay, back to dog parks. So you have in your packet our ad hoc committee's work plan for how we want to tackle this issue. It lays out the objectives, tasks, and timeline. Basically, we're doing research in May and June, trying to understand better what other models are looking like, what the interests are of the various stakeholders, and then summarizing what we know about demands and models, and meeting with the master plan staff to discuss how to move forward investigating potential sites in cooperation with their outreach process. Then July and August, we're going to frame our findings, and our pilot monitoring criteria, pros, cons, and costs of potential locations. We'll come back to the commission for discussion and do most of our public outreach there with stakeholders, neighborhood groups, field users. I think we're going to do one-on-one stakeholder meetings as well as a public forum. And then sort out the details of whatever partnership we can come up with, update our findings, and in September, we hope to be able to bring it back to the commission for a recommendation to council. In the meantime, one of the, thank you. One of the items in our objectives that we're not really sure how to get started, we'd love to have some suggestions from you all if you have any thoughts on it, is this fourth bullet, consider metrics and timeline to monitor, evaluate the success of a pilot.
Fourth bullet where?
On the first page under objectives. So, as we were discussing it in our ad hoc group, it occurred to us that with a pilot program, you have to be able to figure out whether it's been successful or not. And that, in order to do so, we have to figure out what matters. So we wanted to have suggestions from you all if you have any. Otherwise, we will continue noodling that around and come back to you.
One of the things that Darren is doing, and you'll see this second page are interview questions that we came up with for him to speak with representatives from other municipalities that have shared use dog off-leash programs. And we came up with what we thought was a pretty comprehensive list of questions. And one of them is, if it was a pilot, what are the key measures? What are, and how long is that pilot? So we are gathering that information as part of our due diligence with other municipalities. But any other ideas, again, welcome.
And before we open to questions and comments, we do have a public speaker, Herb Borak.
Thank you, Chair Headley. Well, two comments at this point. The first, where we do have dog parks where off-leash dog runs are allowed, are all in South Palo Alto. So as you had discussions previously on the commission over the years about dog parks, you should be considering that maybe the pilot program or the first permanent one would be in North Palo Alto. The second comment is we already have an off-leash program. People figure out when the animal control officers aren't around, and they run their dogs off-leash in parks and other places where they're not permitted. So I believe you need to also connect with either animal services, or maybe the dog group can be part of it, although they can't do the enforcement, because if we're going to be continuing to have people on their own decide to create off-leash dog areas, then what's the sense of creating an official one, especially since the official one would probably not be limited to the people and dogs who are currently running off-leash in Palo Alto parks, because maybe just as some people from Palo Alto probably go to Menlo Park's area, people will come from neighboring communities. And so that combination of the enforcement connected with this, I think, is important. Otherwise, I don't see the sense of you're creating this program if the other activity is going to continue to go on. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the commission? Commissioner Cromie.
I see okay, so you built in a discussion with us again in July and August after you've done more information gathering. Also, are you looking at separation of big and small dogs, or have you, where does that fit in as far as if you do it, the design issues?
That's where that would be.
So you'll gather information on how people are doing it right now. I don't know if I saw that in your questionnaire, so you might want to make sure it's in there. Might be in there somewhere. And I am sensitive to our speaker's comment about this enforcement and what it all means, because he's absolutely right that, many people use fields everywhere around the city for off-leash dog use. I'm sure each of us have this going on in our neighborhoods, sometimes with more problems than others. So the way I look at this is if this is a successful program, it would, as it's rolled out in more than one place, it would sort of take care of some of those issues. I think what's going to be hard is if you roll this out in North Palo Alto, which I agree with, actually, if that's possible, then you have, all of a sudden, people across the town might not have, there'll be a disconnect because people won't notice it when they live far away from it. So I think the enforcement is a tricky business, and it does require some consideration on how to best approach that and whether you think there's anything you can do to be effective.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that we should give a lot of thought to. I personally am somewhat skeptical that one temporary limited hours off shared use park is going to be adequate to eliminate unauthorized use of other spaces.
But I think we have to be sensitive. If it is successful, it's the only thing that would ameliorate that problem, but it will depend on the success of the program.
In answer to your question about metrics, to state the obvious, first of all, as the pilot is winding down, whatever you consider that timeline to be, you want to get both sides of the story. So you want to do some of this outreach intercept with both the folks that have been running their dogs and also the neighbors. If it's at all possible, kind of moving to a related point, to do 2 pilots in 2 different areas with 2 different neighborhoods, then it's just much better data than a standalone, study in just one place. You just have much more data to make broader policy decisions than, no matter how the data came out in one place, it may not be replicable. And if it came out completely different in 2 places, that would actually give you a lot of information. Some of the issue questions, again, with the question, some of the challenges, those would be pretty good to do an evaluation on as well. Because you might say, well, this pilot didn't quite work by whatever definition that is, but with these little changes, we ought to do phase 2 of that pilot, make those tweaks, and then we think we can make it work. So it doesn't seem to me like this is an all or nothing. Put it together, evaluate it, well, it didn't quite work, we're done. And it's an ongoing problem going back decades, and will be going forward decades, so let's take the time with it. While I have the floor, I just want to ask one thing, which is, you're saying May and June for research, and May is over. Are you being a little aggressive on that timetable? Or do you think you can really get through the research by, in the next 4 weeks?
I think we will get through most of it in the next 4 weeks.
We've already
Might
met
be
with
below.
a stakeholder group, so we're plowing.
Okay.
But I did say, for the record, that we might be pushing for like a week, or, this might edge a month forward, depending.
Like some of these other issues we're talking about tonight, this is a long-term problem, so it doesn't have a hard and fast deadline.
Right.
Sort of like, let's get it right. 'Cause
That's right.
We don't want it to fail. We're going into this with expectations that it's going to be a success.
That's
gonna
right.
Be, a good add to the community.
Agreed.
Commissioner Ashland.
I didn't see it on here on the questionnaire for the shared use dog parks. The question related to, have you recorded any increase or decrease in illegal off-leash use of park space?
We don't have that on there.
Seems like we might want to ask about that. Yeah, what is the impact that you've noticed, if any? Has there been an increase or decrease in any off-leash use? Just to see if they're finding this to be effective in the problem that we're approaching it to address in part.
Commissioner Recto.
In a perfect world, you're talking about metrics. In a perfect world, I think I'd want to know, does this decrease the amount of illegal off-leash traffic? But I don't think that's practical. I think that'd be just too difficult. It'd be very time-consuming, and I think it's going to be in the noise, which means you'd have to have a lot of hours of observation, and I just don't think it's worth it. So I think you're kind of stuck with survey results, ask people what they think. But when you're saying both sides, I thought you were going to say, ask the people who are using it, but at the same time go over to the people who are off-leash and go up to them and say, why aren't you at the dog park? Do you know about it? Or is there something about this dog park that you don't like, and maybe you get some constructive criticism that way? Or you may find out that your outreach isn't good enough, one of the two.
When you say dog park, are you talking about a specific dog park or an off-leash area? Because
If you have let's say you have a shared use that you're starting up,
right.
and now you go to Hoover Park, where everyone runs off-leash or Greer, and say, why aren't you using the shared dog park? So talk to the people who are illegally running their dogs and ask them why they aren't using the new shared use or whatever type of dog park we have for trial.
Okay.
I think I know the answer to that already.
Location.
Yeah, I mean, people want to walk their dog to run their dog off leash. I just think that's,
But I bet if you went to the next park, wherever this ends up being, this trial, if you went 1 mile over and say, why aren't you using it?
But that's a key. Go as close as you possibly can.
yeah.
Because every neighborhood, you can survey anyone in neighborhoods, they know where the off-leash sites are. So whatever neighborhood you go into, survey that neighborhood and you'll know where the hot spots are. And then you can find the closest one to the off-leash hot spot closest to wherever you set this up. Because I think that would give you the best data on that question.
I think the dog owners are somewhat underserved, and obviously we all agree with that. And so I don't think we necessarily should be enforcing. But I've been, we used to live next to Hoover Park, and I've spent many hours watching baseball games at Hoover Park. I've never once seen anyone enforce the off-leash. In that one area, the grassy area, there's off-leash dogs there all the time, and I've never seen any enforcement at all. If we had a successful dog park, then I think that would be the time to step it up, and you may get more people at the dog park if you start enforcing. But at this point, I don't think that would be necessarily fair.
Thanks. Any other comments? Yes.
Were you on the commission when we had our community forum on dog parks?
No, but I did go to that forum.
So you went to so you saw it, and it was a wonderful turnout, but it was out of balance. And so I see you have a bullet point that says hold public forum with directed outreach to get balanced participation. Can you explain some of your thoughts on how you're going to do that?
I think that'll be once we've come up with some potential recommended locations, then we would want to invite not only the dog group people, but also the neighbors to those location sites, as well as the current users of the fields or whatever the space is.
And are you going to get any public input as you decide on these test sites? Is that part of the equation?
I think so, but part of the process is meeting with MIG because they're doing the broad analysis of Palo Alto, right, parks. And taking the quantitative data that they have, we're gonna rely on them to make some significant recommendations with regard to that. Obviously, taking the stakeholders, we've heard the North Cluster conversation before, and so you have to take all of it in, but I think ultimately the sites are going to be, it's going to be a very small list once you look at all of the specific information, the time of day, the MIG recommendations, the condition of the field, the enforcement issues, all of the operational issues. I think it's going to be a pretty short list of what is actually possible. Also, the safety of the dogs, right? So you have to think about, because they're off leash, So you can't stick them right next to El Camino Real, right, and not expect some tragedy. So there's just a lot of different things when looking at locations that we have to analyze.
Well, I'm a little confused about the timeline then, because will MIG have any data you're meeting with MIG, it's your last bullet point for May and June. Are they going to have data on surveying? They're going to have just their insights as consultants looking
We're meeting
around?
with them to investigate potential sites. It's not a specific, this is our conversation that you're looking at. This is our process for information gathering. It's not saying in May and June we're going to have specific information.
This is not to talk to them about specific sites. This is to talk with them about how best to move forward in identifying potential sites based on what they've laid out already in terms of how they're looking at various sites.
And so, yeah, I guess they have an overlay. They haven't collected any community data. I guess what confuses me is their big mandate is to take input in from our community to decide these things, yet by that time, we're talking next month, to my knowledge, they will have no input whatsoever from our community.
Right, but they'll have an idea what kind of, how they're seeking their input, and we're just trying to figure, this is a process meeting. It's not a substance meeting about potential sites. This is how can we best work with you as we're thinking about potential uses of some places, and you're thinking about potential uses of some places.
So by the time you get to this bullet point under July and August, hold public forum with directed outreach, you're already saying by the time you do that, you're going to know your candidate sites.
We're hoping so.
So,
But it's all dependent on what comes before.
So it sounds like part of your process to decide on your candidate locations, you're not really relying on surveying the community, from what I understand. Because I don't see where surveying the community comes in at all prior to when you're doing your outreach meeting on a potential site.
I think that's probably right. I think that our expectation is that the challenges and constraints that we'll have to work around in order to pick a site are going to lead us to a few obvious choices. And we may decide, based on the research that we do in the next month, that we finish up in the next month, that there's more to that, and we really do need to do our public outreach first. But we didn't want to do the public outreach with the whole universe of possibility. We wanted to have some ideas that weren't set in stone for the public to react to in order to revise our thinking.
And you do have stakeholder outreach here for neighborhood groups and so on.
Yeah.
In that time frame, so it's not like being ignored.
Right. And we want to have information for them about the pros and the cons and the costs before we go out.
I have a comment.
Yes.
I don't know if this makes sense or not, but it strikes me that, the public has sort of told us where they're interested in this, right? They've found a way, that the demand has sort of found its spot. So to one of those places, maybe it's Hoover, where it's already happening, or maybe it's happening, maybe an area where it's happening sort of responsibly, could be a good candidate site, because we already know that's where they want to be, that's where they've sort of set up their program.
Go ahead.
Just in the directed outreach and balanced participation, I wanted to be sure to add, to address not just the dog owners group, but also perhaps some groups that are scared of dogs or have had injuries related to or are concerned about perhaps the elderly or something like that. We've banned them on the school sites for safety reasons, and those same safety reasons exist on non-school sites as well. So I want to make sure that really is balanced.
Thank you. All right, are we ready to move on? Okay. That takes us to the item number 7, ad hoc committee report on community gardens.
Well, I can summarize it. Deirdre and I started with our goals about identifying existing community garden space and looking at underserved areas and mapping out potential resources. So the 3 public community gardens that exist, they're all shown on the map on the second page. The 3 stars you can see are all north of Embarcadero. So those are the Main Garden, which is behind Main Library, Eleanor Party Garden in Eleanor Party Park, and Johnson Park Garden. The wait list for Main and Party is combined, and it's never empty. The current status of Johnson Park is 8 on the wait list. I believe that one is not ever empty either. Kat says almost a day, hardly a day goes by where somebody doesn't call or email expressing interest in a garden plot. So the 3 private or nonprofit or neighborhood gardens that we identified are the Ventura Community Garden, which is directly behind Keys Middle School. It's managed by the Palo Alto Community Child Care, and this is something we wanted to verify with staff because when we spoke to them about it, they said they believed it was city land and city water that they were using. However, to both Deirdre and I, this was a very close garden to us that we didn't know existed until we started looking for it. We kind of heard rumors. The Midtown Community Garden behind Baskin-Robbins in Midtown is Actera kind of financially manages it, but it's run as a nonprofit and leased to a private individual. And the third one is Almost Eden at East Meadow and Middlefield, which was started by Urban Ministries Church, and they were partnering with homeless and underprivileged people to job train, and also donates food back to the food banks. Although those 3, Midtown gives priority to that neighborhood, Ventura gives priority to that neighborhood, and I believe Almost Eden isn't geographically determined, but we did put those on the map as well. They're the 3 triangles. They're a little bit.
If I can just interject, we're not certain that Midtown gives priority to the Midtown neighborhood.
Okay.
So while there's a uniform policy on the public-run gardens by the city, that's really easy to read up on, but each of these individual ones, we don't have all the data. We have some data which Commissioner Ashland just highlighted in terms of the Ventura community one is very different from our public gardens run by the city in that it does give a neighborhood preference. To my knowledge, none of the city-run parks give a neighborhood preference. As long as you live in the city, you're kind of on equal footing. So that's a difference that we found with Ventura, and I'm not sure it's going on any kind of preference. Actually, I think it's the opposite going on in Midtown. The one individual I met there gardening lived in Menlo Park. So we didn't collect data on that. And so I don't have the data on Midtown. And Stacy, do you have any insight into how Almost Eden runs their list?
No, we don't have more information on that now. Yeah, so as far as geographic distribution, there's none that are on the west side of El Camino, and yeah, that's it. That's as far as the map shows us that. So we have a list of things that we'd like more information from the feedback from the commission on. I don't know if I doubt we're gonna get through this all right now, so I'm not sure how you want to proceed on this, but the categories are ways that we want to gather more information, ways that we'd like to promote or expand the program that specifically relates to food sharing and resource sharing there's backyard gardeners as well as community gardeners, and a lot of times they share resources and food, or would if they knew a way to do that. And then we have some areas of policy that we thought we'd like to look into. So Chair Hedderly, we were just saying, as far as the feedback that we'd like to seek from the commission on this, that starts on page 4. How would you like us to do that?
However you like.
So I guess the question is, if anybody on the commission right now has questions, comments, suggestions, or feedback related to this, can we go through that?
Right. Do people feel the need for us to go through section by section, or do you all want to just give us your comments?
I'd suggest as comments.
Okay, great.
I just have one. I was surprised to to see this promote the production of food and food sharing programs, and I was wondering if this was relative to economics or just community sharing, or what kind of was the motivator for that? I wasn't expecting to see that.
Sustainability,
So.
Well, maybe,
It's the sustainability, I thought.
right, when I went out, so I've done some outreach. I did outreach in Barron Park, and I went to their green team meeting because a couple of master gardeners are part of the Barron Park green team. And I expected these master gardeners to be a lot more interested in the community gardens themselves, but they said where the trends are going now is food sharing, and that there's a strong interest in community gardening, but there's equally a strong interest in food sharing. So that kind of came out of our research.
So again, I'm just trying to understand it. So honey is on here. Does that mean that if somebody made it, you would look for ways for that to be shared within the community, different than just selling honey out of this front?
Right. So these are example, if I'm growing oranges and you're growing corn, and I have,
Okay.
so a lot of times people say, I know an 80-year-old who can't pick the oranges off his tree, and he needs help with that, and he'd like to donate them, that kind of thing. So is there a way that we can collaborate where the one who has too much of something that they're growing can share with somebody who needs that and has other things to offer in exchange? So whether you're using public community garden space or your own backyard, your own garden, the same issues relate as far as sharing resources and the output of what you grow.
Yeah, that was another thing I'd written down. Is that because of overproduction, that you want to be able to use food that's available?
Well, it's a bartering, really. It's that sometimes you might be better at growing one thing than the other. So people overproduce on purpose in that respect.
Well, I noticed later in section 4, you say that you're going to check out demand for this as well. So that's part of the research. Yeah, okay.
One thing we really did want some feedback, well, we're really interested in any of your feedback, but we gave you the sample letter, which is on page 6, and we were gearing up to send this out, but we really wanted to make sure that our commission agreed with something like this, because we're uncertain how such a letter would be distributed. So although we're trying to target our research to individuals who are knowledgeable and interested in this, it could be that some neighborhood organizations are more organized than others, and some neighborhood organization chairs really have their finger on the pulse of that particular neighborhood, but other neighborhoods are not as organized. And so I can imagine some of those neighborhoods might just disseminate this letter to the entire neighborhood. It could really go either way. So this is our first time, since I've sat on the commission, this is the first time I'm proposing to do a survey as a commissioner. So I think it's the direction that we're going. I think it ties into what we're doing with our master plan, our Parks and Recreation master plan. I think we want it to be integrated with that. And I think that we don't want to replace that, but we want to use this to inform what we're doing with the master plan surveying. We see it as a synergistic, reciprocal kind of information sharing between us learning how to do this and us letting them know this is an interest. Sorry, I didn't explain that very well, but I just did want to draw your attention to this because it is something that we haven't done before, as far as I know.
I have a couple comments. Did anybody else want to comment? No? Okay. On page 4, number 3, include the following in the master plan community outreach surveys. Are you both on the survey ad hoc committee for the master plan? Or Deirdre is? We both are. You both be.
Yeah, we both are.
I would raise this with Peter when you have your first ad hoc meeting, just to better understand again the process of how to feed into that outreach plan. Then for item number 4, I I think it's a great idea to list nonprofit partnership gardens on the city website under community gardening. I would just recommend that you check with somebody on staff to make sure there aren't any rules or constraints that make that ill-advised. Then on number 6, you say provide yard trimming grinding service to homeowners to support local organic food production. Are you suggesting offering that as a purchased city service?
Yes, well, there have been, people have spoken up on this at various public meetings, and so I don't know at that level yet how it would be organized, but it is something that I'm noticing being spoken about in the city, so we need to understand that better.
Yeah.
We don't have a recommendation
Okay.
on how it would be done.
So I'm not even sure if that's the kind of thing that would be taken on by the Public Works Department or the Parks Department. So that's a question to put on your list as you think about that issue more. I'm sure Rob could provide some guidance there. And then as for the policy questions, I think they're really creative ideas, and this whole thing, I have to say, I'm really happy to see the work you guys put into this. I think this is an issue that's been sort of hanging in the background for this commission for a lot of years, and we've never gotten any traction on it, and I think you did a really great job brainstorming about the issues and laying it out in a clear and useful way. For the policy questions, I would really like to hear back about the more information before diving into whether we want to consider including them in the comprehensive plan or all these items that you've designated under the policy. I'd like to better understand what the demand is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and are we going to, I'm not sure as a commission how we interact with the comprehensive plan either, if we're even giving input on that, or if we would just do it at the level of citizens. I really don't know. The natural environment element, so we have given input on that. So maybe not. It was a while ago.
And they're doing a little bit of a reset. And so we're going to be going back to the natural environment element and the community services and facilities element. So it'll be coming back through the commission for further input.
It will be? Okay. It was unclear to us how the new process was going to compare to the old process.
Yeah.
Or
no.
whether, okay.
It'll be a little different. Maybe you and I can talk offline,
Yeah.
figure out how we can insert this in the appropriate timeline.
And we can discuss it our next meeting.
Yeah.
That would be really good if we have that kind of integration. So is that what you meant, that you wanted more discussion before so as a commission, we would make a recommendation?
On page 4, we're talking about the churches and other places. I think that's a really good idea. I guess my question would be is, what's the city's role? Is it that we're just encourage them to do that, that we would offer to do the sign-up and the organization for that, and when there's vacant plots, we would be the one that would be filling them, would be helping them with construction costs? What would the city's role with the churches or other organizations be?
Right. So I think that's a really good question. And right now we have this sort of amorphous role with our nonprofit partners, so that Commissioner Ashland and I didn't really get to the bottom. Each one seems to sort of be on its unique track that's sort of organically developed. So I think as we start to understand that more, we could propose more models for that. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah. I'd be curious what they're thinking, and also maybe they thought of it and said they don't want to do it because of X. And if that X is the organization, I think we already have that in place. If that X is construction costs, well, then maybe we don't have that in place. I don't know.
Right, so we can start by looking where we do have it in place and then go from there.
Yeah, I think one major thing is organization. That's when the city does have a very good organization for these existing gardens, and changing it from 3 gardens to 4 gardens, very little incremental cost.
Councilmember Schmidt.
just a thought, listening to the last two items. If there's a little obscure part of any park, would it make sense to have a joint proposal of dog run and community garden, get two very different groups and yet very passionate groups together to say that would be a good use of this obscure thing? And one, you would build the political support for it, and two, you would find out how many people in the neighborhood would buy into one of these two things and support each other in order to achieve their goal.
So I think that's a fabulous idea because it's different groups that can support each other. But the problem that we have is we have the dog parks they're on different sides of the city. So we have public community gardens on the north side where we need more dog parks, and we have dog parks on the south side. So right now, if you look at our map, we have so many public gardens on the north side. So that's a little bit of the problem. It might not happen in phase 1 because of that, but we could still consider it just as a pilot study, even though we're not, if we do, like, let's say we just.
One joint use on each side, RD Park on one side and maybe JLS on the other, where you take what is a dog run in one park and add a little community garden space, and you take what's a community garden and add a little dog run. You get support from both groups for both operations.
Great idea. So, food for thought.
I have one more comment. This is outside our jurisdiction, but that utility has that grassy area on Colorado there, right next to West Bay Shore. And all it does is just sit there and soak up water.
Yeah.
And that would be good for a dog run, that would be good for park, for a garden.
Very big, though, isn't it?
I think it's
More
big
than
enough
half
for-
an acre.
Which location?
Which is bigger than.
This is-
bigger
It's
than
where
any
we
of our
walked.
dog
It's
parks.
on Colorado Avenue near West Bay Shore. It's exactly where we
Yeah,
walked.
We talked about that,
Oh, okay.
Darren,
It's-
actually.
It's been on radar before. It's been brought up before.
So are you guys,
Oh,
sorry.
are there any other spots like that? That's the one that comes to mind when I think of non-park but city-owned land. So,
That's the utilities people, so they would have to give the approval.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah,
yeah, but
They use it as access to the utility garden, which is blocked so far, but that's.
it's
That's
not
the
to say
Sterling
that it
Canal
couldn't
piece.
happen.
But you're talking about the piece that's right front Colorado Avenue.
right
which
on
is
Colorado,
grass and
yeah,
bushes.
just grassy area and bushes right now.
So we're looking into what the restrictions are on that
Okay.
space as well.
But are there any other similar spots around? I don't know. I mean, there's the utility over by Middlefield and also by Rinconada, but I don't think of those have the same big grass area the Colorado one does.
I noticed what looks like a lot of those kinds of spots in Barron Park, kind of around Gunn and around Foothill Expressway, but just a lot of open space. I don't understand whose jurisdiction it is.
Right.
Right.
So are you guys looking, are you working with Darren?
We haven't met with him yet, but now that that's our next step. Well, we met with Darren to go do a walkthrough on Sterling Canal. So we weren't really ready to report on that yet. It's a
Okay.
bit confusing.
So especially since he wasn't here today, I suggest you follow up with him and get him in the loop.
Right, so we'll share this document with him and then move forward. Yes,
And then you had a specific question about this letter to the neighborhoods,
yes.
which I think is a great letter. My only caution is to not step on the master plan survey process. So I would check with Darren or maybe Peter for some guidance about that.
And I would just add that we want to be careful not to sort of lead the public to think that we can do something necessarily, because there may not be resources to do it. And sort of an interesting question related to that is if there is a real appetite for this, and I'm not sure that there is necessarily, but if there is there enough interest that folks are willing to give up some portion of a local park to allow for a community garden to exist there?
Well, that's the model that we've used with the ones so far.
Right.
So
Yeah,
it's worked.
yeah.
And that's why I really want to go back and understand more about Johnson, how that came into being. So some of this is historical to try to, because we might learn that did grow out of an interest right in that location.
And I would just suggest on this sample letter that maybe the safer way to go is to not get into the level of detail of that first bullet, but just, since you're making your introduction to the neighborhood association, you can just ask that second bullet, who are the best contacts to learn more about your neighborhood's interests? And then you can have one-on-one conversations rather than a very public solicitation of input about gardens, to Rob's point.
That's kind of the input I was looking for, because both of those bullets are doing two different things. And so your recommendation is to lean toward the second bullet and not try to gather the detailed information until you get that person.
Right.
So do it in a tiered fashion. Okay.
But again, you want to be sure to run it by Darren as well,
Right.
because he's your liaison for that. Does that wrap it up for community gardens? Let's move on to item number 8, ad hoc committee liaison updates. I have a short update on the website. Does anybody else have other ad hoc updates? Okay, so the website, you saw our work plan last month. We did meet a few weeks ago with Catherine and Stacy and I, and it's come to our attention that the data on the site currently is all over the place, that there were all sorts of bugs in the transfer from the old city system to the new city system. So we've spent this month going back through the data that exists now to make sure we have the right dates for the right material and the right commission for the right site and all that kind of detail. And that we have till the end of the month to finish that, and I think we're on track. So then June, so that just pushes us out a little bit. So June, we'll plan to work on the design and setting up links. And July or August, we hope to get back to the commission for approval, and hopefully we'll still be able to be up by fall. That's it. That brings us to comment.
I just had one comment. I was concerned when 2 members of the public said it was hard to find our minutes. And we only learn these things when we go on the site ourselves. And so, I don't know, would you be willing to do that as part of this website to make sure you go back and see if that's accessible?
That's exactly what we're doing.
Okay, great. Because I've found it frustrating myself when I've tried to use it. And it seems to me like, didn't we do an update a year and a half ago? Is this another one?
Well, this is an update specifically to the Parks and Recreation website. The city has done two different updates for the city website, you know.
Okay, so comments and announcements.
I have just a couple.
Go ahead.
Everyone get their passport? There. I talked about this at the last commission meeting, but I want to give a shout out to Erin Perez. Actually, she's Greg's assistant, and she does special projects and supports Greg and does a lot of marketing type stuff. Oversees our Enjoy catalog and preparing that, and she took the lead in doing this. And we had this idea of celebrating Parks and Recreation in July. It's the National Parks and Recreation Month. So we created this passport, which has 20 different activities that we're encouraging people to participate in. And as they go and participate in them, they can get a stamp. And if they complete 10 of these things in the month of July, they get to go in a drawing for some special prizes. And there's several special prizes, one of which is a fast-track pass at the chili cook-off next year, where you don't have to stand in line. You're straight to the front of the line, which is a really awesome one. But so there's different things. There's camping, visit the art center. There's a variety of sort of snapping a selfie shot in front of your favorite piece of art. But the whole idea is to get outside, get involved in Parks and Recreation. So I think it's a nice little marketing tool. I have some extras here. These will be available at the Lucy Stone Community Center and at the Junior Museum and the other centers where families and kids can pick them up. So I have a couple of extras if you'd like to start sharing them around.
I just want to comment on your announcement, because I brought the Enjoy catalog.
Yeah.
That I thought was absolutely terrific.
Good.
Absolutely terrific. And then I go in there and say, what's this passport stuff? This is awesome.
Yeah.
You know, and just to get people completely involved in it, just kudos.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun, and we're ramping up for summer right now, and our enrollment is almost 20% over last year at this time, so it's really terrific.
It was up last year, too.
Yeah, it was up last year. So lot of people going to be participating in our summer programs, which is great. The only other thing I wanted to mention, which is not what you want to hear, is the golf course project. We don't have our permit from the water board yet. We've provided them with everything they need, and so we're awaiting their response at this point. We are ready to go. We've done the RFP. We've selected the contractor. We've negotiated a contract and an amount which is ready to go to council in June, as soon as we get a little more clarity on the permit from the water board.
This permit isn't required to do anything, or is there only to do certain things? And we could start some aspect of the construction without the permit.
We can't start without.
Can't do anything.
But we've been very, very responsive to the water board, and our city manager's been terrific in working with the chief executive there. And so we're cautiously hopeful that something's going to break loose here pretty soon.
Are they being responsive to us? When we give inputs, do they sit on the
Well,
desk for 2 weeks, or do they respond back?
Not entirely. I mean, there does not appear to be a sense of urgency on their part, despite our sense of urgency in calling and indicating that it's really the public that's hurting or losing money at the golf course. And so we need to begin. But they don't seem terribly concerned about that. So,
Is the water board a state agency, or where does it flow down?
there's I don't know how many. I want to say there's 13 regional water boards, and then there's a state, and they sort of all report to a state board.
So the only way to get them pressure is through the state government?
Right, and we've issued some correspondence to the state board that takes legal issue with some of the decision making they're making at the regional level. But we also have let the state board know that we are working with the regional board and are hopeful that something's going to come through. So to hold this in abeyance rather than pursue a legal course of action, which we really don't want to do. I think there's a lot of common interest actually between the water board and what we're doing at the golf course. So
Have our representatives been helping at all?
we've been in contact with local representatives. The city council's been very involved. So we're not there yet. We're getting close. We're not there yet.
Well, you're held up for a set of reasons that are operating in parallel too, so is there any movement on that other front?
Well, there is this. The water board has officially given us a letter that said they have separated the golf course project from the levee project, and saying they're not looking at those together at this point anymore. Because their issue really isn't with the golf course design and project; it's with the levee project that they'd like to see some changes there. And for quite some time, they were holding them together and saying they are. And while they are companion projects, the golf course project can very well be a standalone project and accomplishes a lot of the sort of mission goals that the water board has, and they've agreed to that and they recognize that. So we've provided them with all the information they need. I think 3 or 4 different occasions now, letters back and forth, and the ball is back in their court now, and they need to respond. They've had the latest correspondence for I think 2 weeks now from us. So we're hoping to hear this week or next.
Is are you making any changes to design throughout this discussion or not?
No.
Okay, because if you do, it'd be interesting to hear about that. You would let us know, I presume.
Yeah, there was some discussion, Commissioner Premier. It's a good question. Their interest is not in design changes of the golf course. It's at the levee project, and so the levee system does have, as it takes that turn and then heads towards the airport. The other side of that levee is the Faber track, that area. That part of the levee system isn't changing very much in the levee design. The golf course design has actually some room there that would allow that levee system to change a little bit, and actually could widen the channel a little bit if they felt like it was necessary and good for flood control and good for the environment. I think the water board would like to see that happen. I think the Joint Powers Authority doesn't think it's necessary and will not help, so they're not aligned there. But from the golf course project, we're saying, well, if that is something that needs to happen in the future, it can happen with the current design of the golf
that seems like a good way forward
Yeah.
in the negotiations. So that's kind of, I was interested in.
Are we continuing to stockpile dirt, or is that stopped?
We are. It's going very well. We're stockpiling every day, so we're looking good there in terms of getting all of the soil we need, which is a lot, and it comes with revenue to support the project, $1.3 million. So we're looking like we're going to be able to achieve that, which is, that's good.
Raise it up.
Yeah.
The more dirt, the better.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
I just had a question, comment, as Councilmember Schmidt noted. I have been around golf courses recently, one of which has been the Muni, and it's been, I don't know why I was surprised, but I was, but the people that come in to ask about the course are just absolutely all over the board because no one knows what's happening. I mean, we barely know what's happening, so it's not, and one guy came in and said, when is this thing gonna get started? I expected that. Another guy came in a different day and said, is the course done now? Literally, and everything in between. So I've heard 4 different comments on 4 different occasions with people walking in the door. So there's nothing you can do about that now. But when we get a final date and what we're going to do, we should have a little brochure there. Maybe not as elaborate as this, but just so staff can hand it out and say, here's the real scoop. And, pass it around, go viral with this, because in such and such a date, this is when we're going to have this great golf course here.
yeah, absolutely. It's been a challenge not having the date and that moving, and not just city staff, but also Brad Lazaros, who's out there, and Valley Crest,
Yeah.
our contractors out there, and they're trying to hold their staff, on board because they thought we'd be closed by now. So I hear your point.
Yeah, okay.
I have a comment about the passport.
Okay.
I'm happy to see that take a selfie at the duck pond made the list.
Oh, it doesn't show anyone feeding ducks, does it?
No, there is a duck, but no feeding of it. I
Okay.
was just going to suggest, since the feeding wildlife and feral animals ordinance is up on the consent calendar for June 9th,
Right.
that ought to be plenty of time between June 9th and the 1st of July to make sure you get some signage out there
Yeah.
about the new ordinance. You wouldn't want to be inviting people out and have them feeding ducks
Yeah.
immediately after we ban
Instead of
it.
getting a stamp, they'll get a ticket.
Right.
That wouldn't be good.
Right.
There's one silly question, but the selfies, people are encouraged to bring them rather than submit them online? They can't post them somewhere? I mean, they're selfies, they're on your phone.
Well, we're asking, people to come in and bring their passport and show they have, they're going to get stamps on this thing.
Oh, so, okay, so the whole thing is in person?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we did talk about trying to collect the selfies, and is there some piece of artwork or something we could do online with all those different, pictures of people visiting parks and art. And so we might.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah. Thinking back.
That's for next summer. That's next summer.
Yeah. Yeah. This will be a good test. Test if that works.
Okay, let's move on to tentative agenda. Oh,
I had
I'm
one
sorry.
comment. Rob isn't the only one that gets to speak. No, I was commenting on a comment there. I just wanted to point out that 3 commissioners went to the dedication of the redwoods in the park, which was just actually a very lovely ceremony, and the mayor made a few remarks, and it was great to see the community, the park that full of people, and to also see, as I said to a couple people, to also see that many policemen in one place, and it wasn't an emergency.
Yeah.
It was lovely. They were just supporting, fellow officers that some of them have never met, but because of the, camaraderie and the brotherhood of that organization. And the chief made some comments, so it was really, really lovely.
Very good.
Any other comments or announcements? Okay, now we'll move on to tentative agenda for June 24th, commission meeting. I think we'll have some ad hoc updates. If there are any ad hoc committees who want an agenda item for a fuller discussion, please let me know, and we'll work that in. Rob, did you have anything else for the agenda for June?
I don't have anything specific that I have listed here. I'd have to go back and look and talk to Greg and Darren and Peter to see if they have something coming forward.
So this raises the question of, should we take a month off this summer? And as, if you work, we work backwards from, we have our joint council session in August, then, and we have the master plan consultants coming in July. I think it'd be nice to have a meeting in July to be able to prep for the council meeting as well as hear the MIG report. So I would recommend that if we do take a month off, that it either be June or August. But again, I don't know what else is pending on the pipeline.
Right.
Can we just make sure, show hands to make sure that people are going to be here for that joint meeting? That's important. That's an important meeting.
August 11th. I see no objections.
Seems like August might be the better month, because you're already meeting in August with the joint session.
Right. What do y'all think? If we had an August meeting?
It would be the 26th. August, which, and, you know, everyone's back at school by that point, so I don't know if that makes sense for the commission to have that month off. Would it be better to have June?
I did hear Peter say, for the record, that meeting in July with the consultant could be moved.
Yes,
To
that's
August.
right.
So he could move it to August, but I know you want that prep.
We definitely have to prep for the joint council session. We could try to do that in June instead of July, if that's everybody's preference.
That would be
But that would be next month.
June 22nd.
24th.
Oh, I'm in July, you're right. June 24th. That's right.
Well,
None of those months work
I
for
also-
you, I
That's
thought.
not true. I can make them all work, but, I mean, preference-wise, I would like July off, but, I mean, I can make it work.
I just want to also make sure we need to be mindful of the master plan process so that
Right.
we are meeting when necessary to get that plan to council, get input to council by September. That will come up really fast.
So I was thinking, Peter did say they were flexible for when the consultant came, but it sounded to me as though there's more information later. So I thought it might be more productive to meet with them either July or August than in June.
Yeah, they won't be ready in June. I confirmed that today.
You did?
Yeah.
Okay.
With enough information that would make it really worthwhile for the committee.
So based on that, it seems like we should take June off if we're going to take one off. I mean, I know July is really enticing, but I don't want to miss the boat with some of the master plan work that we need to do.
Well, why don't we come back to the issue of, do we want to take one off?
I was just going to say, we don't have to.
Right. I mean, if we have a short meeting in June because we have 3 ad hoc committee reports, but that moves it along, you know, that's not so bad.
I wish I actually knew my summer travel plans, but we might not have any, so I'm up in the air.
Yeah, I know I'm available for all of them, but just the way our travel lands, it's in the beginnings of the months rather than the ends. Do you know your calendar when you're in town?
Yeah. I mean, I can make, I mean, I can come in June, I just have a house full of company. July, I could make work, I'll delay my trip a day, and August I'm around. The 26th, I'm around. It's the first day of school.
I don't think it's optimal to be planning for an August 11th meeting on June 24th. You know, so keeping our regular meeting in July, which is still, you know, a couple weeks.
The other thing, you know, having the meeting MIG and the consultants and seeing some of the work already and having some dialogue with them in advance of the study session with council strikes me as something that would
Right.
be good.
Definitely. So So I think, I would just say the default is we don't take a break this year. And if it's a short meeting, that's how it's ended up the last 5 years.
We
so I
never
don't
do
know.
take one.
Well, everybody raise their hand.
Yeah.
Because I have to leave in like 2 seconds. I'm getting crazy texts from my friends so much.
Okay,
Does that work for everybody?
and if we're missing somebody, we're missing somebody, but, you know.
All right. It's a plan.
If one of us knows we have to miss a meeting, can we submit comments in advance in some form? Is that doable? Okay, cool.
So still on the study, are we done with the agenda for next month? Because I don't think it's too early to talk about possible topics for the joint session.
Oh, yeah, I think that's true, yeah.
So I think that should be on there.
For next month, yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay, I didn't hear that mentioned, so
I didn't mention.
that's fine.
I didn't hear much on the agenda for next month yet, or we're still getting there, right?
You got a big report to give. You got plenty to do.
I would entertain a motion to adjourn anytime.
I so move.